Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I remember the hush of the station when I punched out at midnight. The fluorescent lights buzzed like a distant reminder that I'd been awake too long. My cruiser was parked in its usual slot, engine off, keys cold in my hand. I flicked on the recorder, its red light glaring back like it was daring me to forget. The call came in just before dusk. Suspicious activity, dispatch said, voice clipped. A kid, 17 maybe, found something weird in an alley behind the old bakery. Said it looked like footprints, but no one lived there anymore. I said I'd check it out. Standard fare. I didn't think I'd be back 20 minutes later, wondering what the hell I'd just seen. I drove down 6th Street, steering wheel slick with leftover sweat. The neighborhood was half-empty row houses, peeling paint, broken street lamps. The alley plunged into shadow between two abandoned storefronts. No glow of business signs, no hum of traffic. The world felt muted. I killed the headlights and coasted in. The engine's idle was a low hum, like I was trespassing in my own mind. Footprints appeared at the mouth of the alley. Boots, child size. They led to a rusted dumpster, where the lid was cracked open. I caught a whiff of something rotten. I shone the flashlight in. Nothing but trash bags and droppings. I knelt, traced an imprint in the wet gravel. The print stopped there, no continuation, no exit, like someone vanished into the wall. I radioed dispatch. "Nothing here," I said. "Looks clear." My voice sounded flat. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, tasted metal, but I knew. I saw the shape crouched behind the dumpster, just a silhouette, lean, watching me. Didn't move when I swept the beam over it, and then the beam flickered, crackle on the radio, headlights from a passing car. But when the beam steadied, the shadow was gone. I told dispatch the alley was empty. I didn't mention the footprints ended mid-path. I omitted that I'd heard breathing even after I turned off my mic. Back at the cruiser, I sat for a moment. Engine off, recorder running. Feels easier to speak here than write it down. I remembered why I became an officer. Thought I could help people. But nights like this, the weight of what I saw and didn't say sits in my chest. I sank into the vinyl seat, rain beginning to patter on the roof. I should have gone back, should have dragged that dumpster aside, should have called for backup, but I didn't. I drove on. The alley disappeared behind me, swallowed by black. 2 nights later, another call. Break-in, vacant house on Maple. Lights on inside, windows broken out. I arrived to flashing blue and red. Neighbors peeking. Dispatch asked for a status. I said secure, no one inside. But when I swept the interior with my flashlight, every frame hanging on the wall was snapped inward. Faces turned away. Each snapshot I passed hovered in the beam like a warning, and I heard a soft thump upstairs, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. I radioed code 4. I said no sign of movement, even when my gut told me something was up those stairs. Something wrong with a picture frame laying face down in the foyer. I could have drawn blood from the air. I walked outside, pretended to tape off the scene. The neighbor lady whispered, "Is it ghosts?" I told her nothing to worry about. A loose board or a stray cat. I never filed that the photos were turned. I never logged the sound on the second floor. A week later, the station got noise complaints from the same vacant house. I rolled by, no officer tickets in the file. Lights off now. I still saw the frames, turned inward, behind the curtained windows. On a night shift, you learn to forget. You'll rationalize. It was a trick of the flashlight, wind rattling sheets, hallucination when you're dead tired. But every time I pass that block, I feel the hair on my neck prickle. Every time I lie in bed, I hear a slow thump, like footsteps pacing in the attic. I'm not sure why I didn't report it. Maybe I doubted myself. Maybe I thought I'd sound crazy. Or maybe I just didn't want another late shift shuffling through a crime scene again. Dispatch patched me through just after dusk. Suspicious activity, they said. A teenager reported footprints in the alley behind the old bakery on 6th. No one's supposed to be there. I shrugged and flipped on my cruiser's lights, thinking it'd be another false alarm. The streets were half empty by then, the sky settling into that bruised purple twilight. I rolled down Main toward 6th, cracked pavement bouncing the cruiser's headlights. The bakery sat dark, glass storefront dusty, letters peeling. To my left, the alley gaped like an open wound between two boarded-up shops. I killed the engine and stepped out into the cold that had crept in with the evening. My boots crunched through remnant gravel where someone long ago tore up the blacktop. I tugged my coat tighter, the collar stiff against my neck, and clicked on the flashlight. The beam sliced through gathering shadows. Footprints started at the mouth of the alley. Boot treads, teen size. They led straight to a rusted dumpster. I crouched, trained the beam on the lid. It was cracked open a sliver, like someone left it ajar on purpose. The stench of rot hit me, sharp and sour. I swallowed, tried to ignore it. The prints ended at the dumpster's lip. There was no continuation, no path leading out. It was as if someone had simply stepped in and vanished. I traced a tread with my fingertip, gravel crumbling under my glove. I asked dispatch to roll a unit by later for cleanup. "Looks clear," I said. My voice came out flat. I didn't mention how the prints stopped mid-stride, or the hollow thud that echoed when my flashlight flickered against metal. I stood and swung the beam around. The alley walls were graffiti-tagged, abandoned signs flapping in an invisible draft. I heard my own breath, quick and ragged. A distant siren wailed, then faded. I knelt again, pushing the dumpster lid further. Empty trash bags. Then something caught in the light, an angle of metal, twisted. I poked at it, a bullet casing. Copper rim dulled, wet with dew. I straightened, heart thudding. I didn't run a radio call. I didn't write it down. No need to start an investigation when no crime was reported. I exhaled, got to my feet. Heat drained from my chest in a slow slide. I swept the beams over the walls again, but found no one. No movement. Just two walls and the night stretching beyond. I paused at the edge of the alley, thought about 2 nights ago when a similar call came in from Maple Street. Another vacant lot, another set of footprints fading into thin air. I'd chalked that up to pranksters, teenagers playing cops and robbers. But the bullet casing changed things. Homicide or robbery gone wrong, or something worse. I took a final look, then climbed back into the cruiser. I shoved the casing into an evidence bag, tagged it under "Found Property," and tucked it in the glove box. I figured I'd drop it off at the station before my next break. Wouldn't hurt to log it, even if no suspects or victims surfaced. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine. Rain began to patter on the roof, tapping like fingernails. I flicked on the wipers and backed out of the alley. Headlights caught against a slick curb, reflecting back at me. The casing lay heavy in my pocket. I didn't make the call. I didn't note the casing in my notebook. I drove away. Weeks later, news broke. A body found behind the bakery. Kids poking around had discovered it after school. No prints, no witnesses. They called it a hit and run or a homicide. I never caught the full story. Dispatch logged it under unfounded leads. I sat behind my desk, listening to the chatter on the radio. My notebook lay open, blank pages waiting. The casing was still in my pocket. My hands hovered over the keys, but I didn't start a report. I'd already told dispatch the alley was clear. I couldn't explain why I'd left my notes empty, why I'd given that kid a shrug instead of more attention. I should have gone back, should have searched every inch, should have called for backup, should have looked for blood spatter, tire marks, anything. But I didn't. I got tired of chasing ghosts. Tired of rattling through cold alleys with nothing to show for it. Tired of hearing footsteps that weren't there. I packed up my gear at the end of the shift, tossed the casing in the trash bin by the locker room. The bag tore. Casing clinked on metal. I let it drop. No one would find it there. No one would know I'd ever had it. Now, every time I hear the radio call for 6th and Elm, my chest tightens. Every time I pass the old bakery, headlights scanning empty windows, my skin crawls. I think about that body, the way it lay hidden until kids made a game of their phones. I think about the prints that ended at the dumpster. I think about the casing that told me someone had been there before me. It started with a kid's tip, plain and simple. I was 30 minutes into a graveyard shift, lights low on the dashboard, coffee long cold in a styrofoam cup. The call came over the radio as a suspicious vehicle at the old apartment lot on Elm. A teenager, nervous, breath catching in his voice, said he'd seen a car buried in snow. Window down, no footprints in the drifts. That's how he found me, leaning against the cruiser, feet pressed to the bumper, staring at a geometry of faded yellow lines under street lamps. I drove down Elm, wipers scraping thin flakes off the windshield, headlights carving a path through the dark. The lot was quiet. Apartments shuttered, washer-dryer hum gone. The whole place slept behind locked doors. But there, at the far end, the sedan waited exactly where the kid said. Snow capped the hood, blanketing everything tight and clean. Everywhere but that driver's window, stuck open against the wind. I keyed the mic. Unit 15, I'm on scene, I said, voice steady. I didn't add how the hair on my neck already felt tight, like wires under skin. I swung the cruiser door open, stepped into an echoing hush. The snow crunched underfoot, soft at first, then crackling. I rounded the car, flashlight sweeping the wheel wells, the roof, the cracked mirror. I circled back, heart thumping slow, and saw fingerprints rimmed in frost along the inside of the window frame. Someone climbed in. Someone heavy enough to press grease into glass, but never moved it back up. I jotted the plate on a scrap of paper. It matched a stolen vehicle hit from 3 weeks ago. Abandoned after a high-speed chase, they'd said. I ran it through the system while I hovered at the trunk. It clicked. Stolen, possibly involved in armed robbery. Good intel, but no address, no suspects, no leads. I dialed the school liaison, Officer Green, like you do when you want a kid's eyes on something. Green's domain was the local high school, but he liked the extra attention. His office was a closet painted dull gray, cinder block walls with a window blacked out by construction paper. Even then, it felt off, like hiding more than laundry carts. I left him the plate number and lot details. On the way back to the cruiser, I flicked the flashlight across the pavement and saw something half buried. A shell casing, copper rim dented, stamped with a date likely older than the kid who tipped me off. I bagged it as found property, tagged it under no further action pending, and stuffed it in my coat pocket. Didn't log it in the notebook, didn't call it in. Nothing to connect it if there were no other prints. That night, when I clocked out, I drove past the school to drop the note for Green. The lot sat empty under cracked floodlights. I imagined him scrawling in his log, dispatching a patrol car, shifting paperwork. I saw the blacked-out window, the echo of his voice promising to handle it. I shrugged it off. 2 days later, I heard the story through dispatch chatter. Green had brought in 2 students for questioning after lunch. Rumors flew, strange jokes, 2 friendly pats on the shoulder, offers of off-campus lunch that smelled more like grooming than reward. I didn't act. I told myself I'd stick to my beat, my jurisdiction. School drama wasn't mine. Weeks later, the stolen car was gone. Towed, impounded, maybe used for parts. The casing, still in my pocket, weighed heavy. I tossed it in the station trash can without thinking. Felt cleaner that way. Then the news broke. Green arrested for sexual misconduct. Paid students videotaped acts, VHS tapes hidden in his locker. They said he tried to destroy the tapes through his brother, but the brother turned him in anyway, convicted, sentenced. The station went sideways, investigations, lawsuits, internal affairs. I read the headlines on my phone in the locker room. I flipped through my notebook. Under that night's entry, Unit on Elm at 2:15, stolen plate recovered. No occupant, lot secure. No mention of the shell casing. No mention of the student I'd picked up to pass the note to Green. No mention of the friendly drive back to the school, wheels crunching through snow as Green asked what I had planned for the weekend. I only wrote down mileage and time. I've replayed that ride back 1,000 times. I see his grin, eyes glinting under the cruiser's dome light as he joked about fun plans on a Saturday. I remember how I laughed, half-hearted, as he offered to swing by a taco joint off campus. I remember the shape of him in the driver's seat, shoulders hunched, voice low. I still don't know why I let him off the hook. It's safer in the file to call everything routine, to bury the weird details under formal language. I told dispatch the lot was secure, so every follow-up call went nowhere. When my shift ended, closed files felt like clean slates. I kept my mouth shut. Now, years later, I drive past that old lot. Billboard torn, weeds pushing through pavement. I see the outline of footprints in the snow, frozen in memory, leading to nowhere. I feel the weight in my pocket where the casing used to rest. I feel the emptiness where the kid's report should have echoed in someone else's logs. I'll never file this report. I hold this memory in the dark, cradled by the hum of a dashboard, spoken into a recorder no one will ever play back. I didn't put this in the log. I never meant to record it, but I can't shake the memory, so I'm speaking it now. It was past midnight, and I'd already done 3 calls. Nothing but busted streetlights and drunks passed out on stoops. My cruiser idled at a 4-way stop near Elm and 6th, wipers wiping tired arcs across the windshield. Rain had settled in like a second shift partner, tapping the roof, whispering that I was the only one awake. The call came in over the air. Suspicious footprints behind the old bakery. I keyed the mic, told dispatch I was en route. A teenager had phoned it in from his bedroom window, said he'd seen shapes moving behind the bleached bricks. No forced entry, no sound on the scanner. Just footprints that appeared and vanished. A prank, I assumed. Kids like to scare themselves. But it earned me another trip down 6th. The bakery sat dark. Its neon sign, half shattered, flickered orange and black. The brick walls wore graffiti like old scars. I parked under a street lamp that gave one last gasp before dying, leaving my cruiser in a circle of dim light. I grabbed my flashlight, heavy in my hand, and stepped onto the pavement. The rain chilled me through my jacket, but I didn't bother to zip it up all the way. The cold felt familiar. The alley ran between the bakery and a boarded-up storefront. Just a narrow corridor of cracked concrete and broken glass. I clicked the beam on, swinging it side to side. Water pooled in potholes, reflecting the faint glow of the city beyond. I saw footprints, boots youth size, starting at the curb, trailing toward a dumpster. They were crisp in the mud, as if whoever left them hadn't meant to cover their tracks. I knelt and touched the edge of a print with my gloved fingertip. The mud was fresh, clinging to the fabric of my glove, smelling like wet earth and rust. The prints ended abruptly at the dumpster. They didn't continue past the corner. It was like the person walked straight into the wall and disappeared. My mind flared questions. Who? Why? How? But I stayed still, listening. The alley was silent except for the rain and the occasional drip from a loose gutter above. I swept the beam around, catching a flash of something metallic under the dumpster. I leaned forward, almost tipping over, and saw a shell casing. Copper rim bent, rim stamped with a date older than the bakery itself. I clicked the flashlight off and on again. Shadows shifted, but the casing remained in that cruel light. I set the beam aside and crouched, scooped the casing into my palm. It was cold, heavier than I expected. I turned it over, thumb tracing its curve. No blood, no obvious signs of recent use. I pocketed it. Didn't tag it, didn't call it in. I figured I'd drop it off at the station later if I remembered. Small details get lost when you're doing 1,000 small things in a night. I stood and panned the flashlight over the walls. Wet paint dripped down slogans no one cared about anymore. A torn poster flapped in the wind. In the reflection of broken glass, I thought I saw movement. A shadow hunched behind the metal door of the storefront. I froze, heart thudding. The rain masked sound, but I could hear my pulse in my ears. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of light and exhaustion. I raised the beam and swept it over the door. Nothing. Just old plywood splintered and warped. No sign of a body, no sign of a face. I exhaled, smoke trailing from my mouth even though I didn't have a cigarette. I leaned my head back, gave the spot one last look, then pointed the beam at the footprints. I shook my head, whispered, "Nothing here," and keyed the mic. Unit 15 says, "Alley secure, no sign of suspect." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I didn't mention the casing. I didn't mention the footprints ending. I didn't mention that I'd heard breathing, soft and slow, like someone exhaling right behind me when I stood up. I didn't press a call for backup. I didn't get out the tape. I didn't even take a picture. None of it made the report. I stepped back into the rain and clicked off the flashlight. The darkness swallowed me. I felt the cold sting of rain gathering in my hair. I walked back to the cruiser, boots leaving prints in the mud that didn't match the ones I'd just studied. I climbed in, slamming the door against the weather. I sat for a moment, engine off, recorder still running. I wanted to speak into the darkness, let it out in waves of breath and words. But I just closed my eyes and leaned back. The alley became a memory I'd rather forget, except here in the recorder, I can't. I thought of the kid at dispatch, how he tracked my headlights out of his window and felt safe enough to call it in. I thought of the casing in my pocket, copper chill pressing against my skin. I tapped the recorder. The red light flicked with a dull pulse. I clicked the engine on, air conditioner kicking in despite the rain. I rolled out of the lot and onto 6th, headlights carving through more damp streets. I passed the bakery again, its sign sputtering and dying like a bad dream. I haven't gone back. I haven't told anyone the details they'd scoff at. I haven't even written them in my notes. But I feel the weight every time I drive by. Every time I park at shift's end, I place my hand on my jacket pocket where the casing is gone, leaving only the memory of its cold press. I flipped off the station lights at 11:47 p.m., the fluorescent buzz cutting out like someone yanked the power. The cruiser's engine idled soft beside me, door ajar, rain starting to bead on the windshield. I pressed record, the red dot staring back, silent witness to everything I'll never file. The call came over the radio at 11:52. Unit 15 reports of suspicious footprints behind the old bakery on 6th. Caller's a teenage male, says prints appear, then vanish. No injuries, no immediate threat. Standard language, sterile and clean. That night, though, my chest felt tight, like I already knew there was more. I slipped into the driver's seat, door thumping closed behind me. The cruiser's dome light glowed weakly. I checked my notes. Nothing since the drunk passed out on Harrison. I'd ticked off 3 calls, loiterers, busted streetlights, a false alarm alarmed by an overheated fire alarm. Routine nothing. I told dispatch, en route to 6th and Elm, and flicked on overhead lights. Blue and red danced on the wet pavement, painting storefronts in blood-bright flickers. 6th Avenue was empty, storefronts shuttered early, windows smeared with grime. The bakery sign sagged. Letters rusted away to half a word. The alley yawning between the bakery and an old dry cleaner was the darkest spot on my shift map. I cut the headlights, the cruiser slipping into silence. The night pressed in, only the hum of the engine and the patter of rain on tin roofs around me. I exhaled, pulled on my gloves, the leather still stiff from last week's cold snap. I stepped onto the cracked asphalt, flashlight in hand, beam slicing through columns of mist. The wet concrete glistened underfoot. Every puddle reflected a fractured sky. The alley walls closed in, bricks chipped and painted over by generations of graffiti. My boots echoed, each step sending a lonesome drumbeat into the darkness. I thought of the kid who called it in, probably safe in his bedroom, lights off, curtains drawn. I envied that. Footprints began at the gutter, perfectly spaced, teen-sized boot tread pattern. They led in a straight line toward a dumpster, then disappeared. I knelt, breath fogging in the beam's glare, and pressed a fingertip into wet mud at the print's edge. The imprint was deep enough to hold water, but it ended at the dumpster lip, as if whoever left them simply stepped off the world. I traced the rim of a tread, gravel clinging to my glove. The beam swept upward, illuminating the dumpster's edges. Rust bloomed across dented metal. The lid sat half open, hinges corroded. A stale odor rose, rotting food, something sour and sulfurous. I crouched, aimed the beam inside. Black garbage bags swelled, torn plastic, revealing soggy cardboard and rotten fruit. I could sense something else. A long, dark shape pressed beneath a bag, an angle that didn't belong. I paused, no sound but rain and my pulse. I called dispatch. Unit 15, scene secure so far, no signs of suspect. My voice felt hollow. I didn't mention the prints that went nowhere, or the presence I'd sensed behind me. The beam wavered, flickered. I spun around, nothing but walls and dripping pipes. I shook my head and turned back to the dumpster. Steeling myself, I lifted the lid the rest of the way. The bags shifted. One slid off, spilling soggy wrappers and wet paper. Then I saw it. A shell casing. Copper rim dulled. Engraved stamp worn almost smooth. I picked it up. Stared at the metal in my palm. It was heavier than I expected. Cold as fresh ice. Someone had brought a gun here. Knew how to cover tracks. Abandon the weapon. Run away, let the night swallow evidence. The prints above told me it wasn't a kid's prank. I stuffed the casing into my coat pocket. I didn't bag it. I didn't log it. Procedure says any evidence goes to property, tagged and cataloged. But I hesitated. What if it tied to something bigger? Gang activity. A shooting no one knew about. What if it kept me digging when I had 100 other calls to chase? I slid the lid back down and stood, wiping my glove on my pant leg. My heart hammered as I swept the beam over the walls. In the cracked plexiglass of a broken window, I thought I saw movement. A pale shape sliding away from the frame. I lifted the beam. Nothing. I blinked against the rain on my eyelashes. My shoulders ached with exhaustion. Enough of this. I radioed again. Unit 15 clear, returning to service. No mention of the casing. No mention of what ended there in that narrow alley. I climbed back into the cruiser, the seat cold as I slid in. The recorder kept running, red dot unwavering. I placed a hand on my pocket, felt the metal press against my thigh. A reminder. Engine roaring, I pulled back onto 6th, headlights carving ribbons through mist. The bakery receded in mirrors. I passed Maple Street on my left. Thought of a vacant house where photos had been turned face down. I hadn't logged that detail either. I made a habit of leaving the odd stuff unfiled, the details that made me question if I belonged in a uniform. My mind shifted gears. I thought about Officer Green down at the high school, his blacked-out office door, jokes too familiar with students. That night, I'd passed him a note about the stolen car. He'd taken it, joked about my weekend plans. I'd laughed, but the humor felt forced. Later, he was arrested. Secrets none of us wanted to admit were real. I'd written only mileage and time, nothing more. Sometimes I wonder if I'm protecting someone when I leave a detail out, or if I'm protecting myself from the endless grind of haunted calls. I told myself I'd deliver the casing at shift's end. I told myself I'd call it in first thing tomorrow, but I didn't. I filed the report clean, crossed out the line where anything odd might have slipped in. The rain turned to a steady drizzle. My windshield wipers cleared trails, then slowed as if they too were tired. I parked back at the station at 12:37 a.m. I tossed the casing into the departmental trash can, listened to it clatter in the metal bin. I watched it fall, heard it land among coffee cups and discarded gloves. I didn't record that. It wasn't in the report. But I say it now into this recorder because if I write it down, it'll be official. And some things are better off whispered in the dark. This ends where it should have begun, in silence, in omission, in the uneasy calm after the flashlight clicks off. And that's all I have for this first watch. I rolled onto Elm just past midnight, cruiser lights off, engine idling soft like a steady breath. The rain had led up to a drizzle, each drop tapping the hood in a slow, uneven rhythm. I cracked the window for air, cold mist drifting in across the console. My recorder sat on the dash, blinking quietly, waiting for me to speak. The call came 2 hours earlier, a teenage kid peering out his window at the apartment lot behind the old bakery on 6th and Elm. He said he'd seen footprints in the mud that ended at a dumpster, then nothing. No forced entry, no disturbance, just prints vanishing into thin air. The dispatcher made it sound like a prank. I let out a sigh, rubbed my temples. 10 years in, and nights like these still got under my skin. By the time I reached the lot, streetlights were flickering, the broken neon sign of the bakery sputtering orange and black. I cut the headlights as I parked under a lamp that buzzed and died when I shut off the engine. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the mist, boots crunching on broken asphalt. The alley gaped between the brick walls of the bakery and a shuttered dry cleaner, 2 walls closing in on a strip of nothing. I clicked the beam on, its barrel slicing a swath through gathering fog. The ground, slick with mud, reflected shards of light. Behind me, the bakery windows were dark, smudged. No sign of anyone. No glow behind curtains or flicker of movement. I exhaled, the breath hanging in the beam like smoke. Footprints led from the curb to the dumpster, a single line of teen-sized treads, each print holding rainwater and gravel. I knelt beside the first, placed a gloved finger in the center. Cold seeped through the glove, stinging my fingertip. I traced the sole's pattern, a worn patch on the right heel, a telltale break in the tread. Someone young, inexperienced, left themselves a mark. I followed the line to the dumpster. Its lid sagged, hinge rusted. I nudged it and it groaned open a crack. A wave of sour odor rolled out. Rotting food, stale cardboard, something metallic. I crouched, beam in my free hand, and peered inside. Garbage bags slumped in the void, one torn open, wet pulp spilling. I saw something dark pressed beneath a bag, a shape too long for trash. My heart thumped beneath my chest. I reached in slowly, the beam trembling against the metal walls. My glove brushed the object. I pulled out a shell casing, copper dull, stamped with a number I couldn't make out in the dim light. I turned it over, thumb curling around the rim, cold and weighty like a promise of violence. I dropped it into my pocket without bagging it. No tags, no chain of custody. I figured I'd sort it later. I pointed the flashlight at the footprints again. They ended at the dumpster's lip. No continuation. No exit into another alley or yard. It was as if someone stepped off the earth itself. I scanned the walls, brick slick with rain, graffiti peeling, and my beam caught a flicker of motion in a broken window pane. I swung the light. Nothing. Just a shuttered storefront. I blinked, rain speckling my lashes. My knuckles whitened on my flashlight as I stood. Should have called it in. Evidence. Possible homicide. Missing person, perhaps. Instead, I clicked off the beam and patted my pockets. I radioed dispatch. 1-5 to dispatch. Alley behind bakery secure. No sign of suspect. My voice sounded hollow, distant even to me. I walked back to the cruiser, footsteps soft on the wet asphalt. The drizzle resumed, tapping against the windshield. I closed the door and sat behind the wheel, the recorder's red light steady. I wanted to speak, to log what I'd seen, but I only sat for a moment and exhaled. I slid the shell casing out of my pocket, stared at it in the dim dash light, then tucked it back away. There was a vacant house on Maple Street I'd been to weeks before. I remembered how every photo in that house had been turned face down, like someone wanted to erase memories. I remembered the faint scream I heard on the second floor, which I logged as wind in my report. I remembered the plastic bags fluttering by the alley windows, rattling like bones. None of it went into the file. I checked my watch. 1:17 a.m. Shift end was hours away. My shift partner was out on a noise complaint 2 blocks over. I was alone with my thoughts, the shell casing pressing cold against my thigh. A routine call had turned into a curiosity I tucked away instead of chasing. I could have pulled the dumpster aside, searched inside deeper, looked for blood spatter, tire marks, anything. But I didn't. My boots grew heavy when I thought about another crime scene. I grew tired of following ghosts. I turned the key, heater rasping to life, steam curling up the windshield. I punched the defroster and watched droplets smear. I cruised Maple Street on instinct, windows down enough to hear the engine hum, but not enough to let the cold in. The vacant house stood dark, curtains closed, no light to betray what lay inside. And I thought about that shell casing, that empty print, the shadow in the pane. I never went back. I never filed a supplement. I never logged the casing in evidence. I let the details fade under my streetlights, feeding the static between calls. But here in the recorder, I can't let it go. I speak because if I wrote it in the report, someone might see it. Questions would follow, internal affairs, press lawsuits, and I'd have to admit I froze, that I let paperwork and fatigue stop me from doing more. I parked back at the station at 1:48 a.m. I tossed the casing in the trash by the locker room sink, listened to it clatter among empty coffee cups. I washed my hands, watched water swirl down the drain. I stared at my reflection in the stainless steel sink and saw someone who'd chosen routine over curiosity. Someone who'd left a part of the truth behind a dumpster in an alley, unfiled. Now I'm here, hands resting on my steering wheel, recorder light blinking, and I tell it all in a rush of words I'll never type. Because some things don't belong in a file. They belong in the dark, in the pause between raindrops, in the dented edges of a shell casing no one noticed. It was 4 a.m. when the radio crackled the tip. Suspicious footprints behind vacant building on 14th Street. I'd already bagged 2 calls that night, one drunk, stumbling at the bus stop, another false alarm in a boarded-up storefront. Routine, one-off disturbances, paperwork easy and clean. But something about that alley drew me back. I killed the cruiser's lights and coasted in, engine buzzing like a mosquito in my ear. The building's bricks were mottled with peeling paint, like old scabs on a wound. The alley ran between its back wall and a chain-link fence that held back weeds taller than a man's knee. I stepped onto cracked asphalt, flashlight in hand, beam trembling. Everything smelled damp. Concrete, rust, rot. I heard my boots squelch in mud, each step a reminder I was alone with my thoughts and whatever broke the silence. Footprints began at the curb, tiny boot treads sinking into the mud. They led toward a rusted dumpster, dragged along on broken wheels, and stopped dead at its rim. I crouched, trained the beam inside. Black trash bags overflowed with soggy cardboard and torn plastic. Beneath them, something dark pressed against metal. I leaned closer, breath fogging the lens. Then I saw it. Handlebars. A bicycle flipped upside down, spokes kinked, chain snapped. No rider in sight. I straightened and swept the beam around. The walls closed in. Tagged graffiti, peeling posters. A lone security camera lens cracked and useless. No sign of forced entry on the building's back door. No lights inside, no movement. I reached into my pocket for radio. 1-5 to dispatch. Scene secure, no obvious crime. My voice sounded flat. I didn't mention the bike. I didn't mention the prints ending mid-path. I clicked off the mic and sank against the dumpster. Rain began to mist, tapping the metal lid. I drew in a slow breath, tasted cold steel in my throat. The bike's frame squeaked as water dripped inside. I half expected someone to materialize from the shadows. A kid lost, a suspect hiding, a neighbor checking on trouble. But the alley stayed silent. I scanned for footprints beyond the pile. Nothing. It was as if whoever rode that bike simply vanished into the night. My hand found the handlebar, black rubber cold under my glove. I lifted the bike, wobbling it to test weight. A snapped chain clinked, echoing off brick. I could call for backup, strip the bike for evidence, drag the dumpster aside. Procedure said anything that odd got logged, impounded, processed. But hours of overtime stared me down and I was tired. I'd sworn off chasing ghosts years ago. I stuffed my hands in my pockets and let it slump back. I remembered the call from 2 weeks prior. The vacant house on Leavenworth, where photos were all turned face down. I'd heard a faint scream on my way out, but wrote wind in the report. I remembered the second hang-up on East Elm where lights flickered, but I never logged the disturbances. I told dispatch everything was clear so many times I stopped questioning why I omitted details. Each night I garbage collected weirdness and threw it in the bin of routine. The alley was just another dump site until I saw the scrap of fabric caught on a jagged nail in the fence. Blue cloth, shredded. My beam picked it out like a signal. I knelt and tugged. It gave easily, a torn sleeve from a child's jacket. I pressed it between gloved fingers, damp, fuzzy, full of grit. I stared at it, tried to catch a scent. Bleach? Sweat? Fear? I leaned back, holding it against my chest as the rain seeped through my coat. The tape in my pocket felt heavy. That MacGuffin of evidence I'd gathered and tossed aside in other alleys. The unsnapped chain on Maple Street, the bullet casing at 6th and Pine, the hairpin at the warehouse. Each detail a sharp weight I carried inside. I clicked the fabric into an evidence bag, finally, and stuffed it in my coat. No tags, no notes, no chain of custody. Better than nothing, or worse than nothing, because now I knew. I called dispatch. 1-5 clear, returning to service. No mention of the bike or the jacket or the prints that led nowhere. No mention of the way the alley's bricks glistened under the single lamp that sputtered, then died. No mention of the thought that settled in my gut. Something bad happened here. Something someone didn't want found, something I almost walked away from. I rose, flashlight sputtering as batteries dipped low. The alley walls pressed inward. My breath steamed, and I thought, this is why I became an officer, to find the missing pieces. But I'd abandoned it. I holstered the beam and climbed back into the cruiser. The city lights reflected off puddles, soft yellow circles drifting in darkness. I started the engine. The heater wheezed warm air onto my face. As I drove away, I glanced in the mirror at the fenced lot. The torn sleeve fluttered under the rain, pinned by a nail. I thought of the kid whose jacket it might be, alone and shivering. Somewhere. I thought of unanswered questions swirling in my mind. Why the bike? Why the prints? Why the jacket? I flicked the wipers, wiped the glass clear for a moment. I'll leave it at that. I won't file it. I'll keep it in my chest. Speak it into this recorder. Let the odd details linger here. Because the report is a neat story, but reality is messy. It's fragments, erased lines, vanished tracks. And I'm the only one who remembers. I rolled onto Elm just past midnight. Headlights off, cruiser idling like an animal settling in its den. Rain had eased to a persistent mist that clung to my coat sleeves and blurred the street lamps into halos. I clicked on the recorder and waited for it to tick over, the red light reflecting in the raindrops on the windshield. I told myself I'd speak it out loud so I wouldn't forget. The call came in at 0047. Reports of suspicious footprints behind the old bakery on 6th and Elm. Caller says they start in the mud, lead to a dumpster, then stop. Dispatch gave it a 5-second breath. No urgency. Check it out if you're free, 1-5. I stared at the clock on the dash. My shift still had hours to go, but I needed something more than busted streetlights and drunks on stoops. I needed to feel the pulse of something unknown, something real. The bakery's neon sign was half shattered, orange tubes flickering against chipped white paint. Its front windows were dark, plastered with "For Lease" flyers curling in the damp. I cut the cruiser's engine and slipped out into the alley. The beam from my flashlight cut a tunnel through the mist, catching raindrops that hung like tiny prisms before falling. The air smelled of wet asphalt and mold. I tasted copper in my mouth. Footprints marked the ground. Boot treads, teen size, pressed deep in the mud at the alley's mouth. They led in a straight line toward a steel dumpster, its lid sagging on rusted hinges. I knelt beside the first print, traced the tread's pattern. worn patch at the heel, a nicked edge at the ball. Someone had walked here without caring who might follow. Pressing my gloved finger into the print, I felt cold seep through my glove like an unwelcome memory. I followed the line, beam sweeping over graffiti-stained walls. Slogans faded into one another. Truth, scribbled in red, crossed out and replaced by "No one listens." A torn paper poster fluttered in the wind, edges soaked, its message illegible. Every step I took echoed against the bricks, my boots scraping gravel in puddles. My breath sounded loud in the hush. At the dumpster, the prints stopped. No continuation. They ended at the metal's lip, as if whoever stepped here stepped off the world. I clicked the flashlight onto the lid and pried it up. The stench hit me. Rotting food, soggy cardboard, something pungent I couldn't name. The inside brimmed with black trash bags, one split open, soggy pulp spilling. I aimed the beam and froze. Beneath the bags lay a bicycle frame, handlebars twisted, one wheel missing spokes. No rider in sight. My heart thumped in my chest, each beat loud against the hush. I blinked, then crouched lower, scanning the pile for other signs. A discarded boot shone at the edge, its sole torn away. I grabbed it, thumb brushing frayed laces and wet leather. I inhaled, catching a whiff of sweat and slow decay. I stood, pressing my back to the dumpster, flashlight trained on the open air. I half expected a figure to step out, but all I saw was the alley stretching away. No exit, no second path, just walls closing in. I radioed dispatch. 1-5 to dispatch, alley secure, no sign of suspect. My voice sounded distant, unreal. I didn't report the bike or the busted boot. I didn't mention the prints that vanished. I didn't call for backup. I didn't request evidence technicians. There was only me, the mist, and the hush of a world that didn't want to be found. I slipped the boot into an evidence bag I carried, tagging it "Found Property." My hands trembled just enough that I had to steady the bag against my thigh. I let the frame go, didn't collect it. Too big for the cruiser's back seat, too heavy to drag out of the alley without a tow. I pressed my glove into my pocket and felt the casing I'd picked up weeks ago at 6th and Pine. Copper cold and still in my pocket. I let it rest there, keeping secrets against my leg. The mist turned to drizzle again, fine needles pattering on the dumpster lid. I clicked off my flashlight and wiped rain from my brow. I thought of the kid who called it in. Maybe he was safe in bed, curtains drawn tight. I thought of other calls. An empty house on Maple where every photo frame had been turned face down. A drive-through sign that screamed on and off though the power was cut. A faint scream I heard on the second floor of a vacant lot that I logged as wind. I thought of each detail I left out. I heard footsteps then, or thought I did, a soft crunch behind me. I swung the beam around, but found only damp pavement and an empty alley. I shivered, even though the night wasn't that cold. I pressed my back against the cruiser, leaned against its door, and exhaled. My recorder kept running. I could speak truths into it, unfiltered, safe from filing or questioning. I slid back into the driver's seat, boots leaving muddy prints on the worn floor mat. I shut the door and leaned my head against it, listening to the rain sliding off the roof. I watched the recorder's red light blink, steady as a heartbeat. I rubbed my jacket pocket where the casing lay, then moved my hand away so it wouldn't leave a wet mark. I started the engine, heater groaning to life. I pulled the cruiser forward, headlights carving ribbons through the fog. The bakery receded in my mirrors, its broken sign flickering farewell. I stayed on 6th until I hit Main, then returned to routine, checking a broken streetlight, logging a noise complaint. Everything neat in the notebook. Everything contained, except this. Now I'm speaking it here. My hands rest on the wheel as the city hums around me. I'll park at shift's end, toss the casing in the trash. Let the boot bag sit until someone figures it out. I won't write supplement notes. I won't send photos to evidence. I'll let shadows swallow the details. Came back 2 nights later, still feeling that weight in my gut. The rain had washed most of the footprints away, but the alley wore new signs of disturbance. Mud smeared higher up the dumpster, fresh streaks of gravel along the walls. I pulled the cruiser under the broken street lamp again and killed the headlights, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The recorder sat on the dash, blinking like a heartbeat. I clicked it on before I stepped out. The air smelled of wet concrete and exhaust, heavy under the lamplight. I touched the edge of the dumpster's lid, cold metal slick with rain. The bicycle frame was gone, but the spot where it had rested glowed darker in the puddles. I knelt, tracing the outline of 2 boot prints, larger than the first, maybe adult size, pressed into the mud beside the smaller teen prints. They headed past the dumpster toward the back door of the bakery. "Dispatch 1-5, I murmured into my collar mic, though I didn't intend to log this. Back at the alley, prints led past the dumpster. My voice trembled. I caught myself and cleared my throat. Alley appears clear, returning to patrol. I waited for the automated reply, then clicked off the mic. The bakery's back door stood ajar, hinges stiff, paint chipped. I shone the flashlight inside. Empty boxes, stale flour sacks, a broken window patched with plywood. No footprints on the tiled floor, no sign of recent human passage, but I smelled something sweet and sour, like spilled sugar fermenting. My stomach knotted. I crouched at the threshold, boots on the threshold tile. Moisture seeped up through cracks, curling at the edges of my soles. I listened. Nothing but dripping water and my own heartbeat. I flicked the beam up and saw scuff marks on the door frame. Fingernail gouges in the wood, splintered paint. Someone had forced this open without kicking. I pushed the door. It swung inward with a groan, revealing the main kitchen. Cast iron pots lay stacked, counters coated in dust. A single stream of water dripped from a loose pipe above the sink, each drop sounding like a pistol shot in the hush. I swept the flashlight left, right, no body, no figure. Then I caught movement, a flicker at the far end of the room. Behind a row of empty ovens, something shifted. A dark shape slipping away. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb tracks. The old linoleum floor was cracked, some tiles missing. I froze, trying to pinpoint the echo of movement. "Hello?" I called softly, voice echoing. No reply, only the hum of the city beyond the walls. I clicked off the beam, letting my night vision take over. The darkness pressed in until I made out the shape of crates stacked in the corner. I circled around, each step slow, deliberate, feeling the tiles uneven beneath me. At the crates, I saw fresh footprints in the dust. Adult size, narrow heels, leading up to a gap between boxes. Whoever was here moved quietly, leaving these prints as if they wanted to be found, or didn't care if they were. I knelt and pressed a fingertip into the print, twisting the dust into a small swirl. My hand shook. I felt a presence behind me, just beyond the beam if I'd had it on. I turned sharply, heart in my throat. Nothing. I swallowed. Thought of the teen who called it in. Probably sleeping now, safe in bed. I wondered if he felt anything watching him from the dark. I stood and walked back toward the door, noting the prints trailing past a collapsed table and into a side corridor I hadn't seen before. The hallway beyond was narrower, bricks on one side, the bakery's inner wall on the other. The air grew colder as I stepped in, breath forming clouds around my head. I clicked the flashlight on again and swept the corridor. At the far end, I caught a glint, metal. A doorknob attached to a yellow door that looked newer than the rest of the building. I approached slowly, heels echoing on the concrete. I reached out, hand trembling, and turned the knob. It yielded with a soft click. The room beyond was small, no windows, concrete floor, a single overhead bulb flickering. Against one wall lay a cluster of items. A torn denim jacket matching the sleeve I'd bagged, a broken gym bag, a discarded baseball glove. The flashlight beam danced across them, revealing scuff marks on the floor and a smear of something dark on the wall, streaked vertical as if scooped by a hand. I snapped photos with my phone. Automatic log, time-stamped. Yet I knew I'd never mention them in my report. I took a deep breath, swallowed. The door felt like a trap behind me. I didn't want to linger. I turned to leave, but my beam caught a notebook on a shelf. Pages creased, scribbled. I edged closer, heart pounding. Lines of writing, half faded. They said no one would see. They were wrong. I lifted the notebook, spine cracking. The rain outside drummed against metal. I flipped pages. Diagrams of footprints, crude maps of the bakery, odd sketches of the oven room. A name scrawled at the top. The teen's name, I recognized from dispatch logs. He'd gone missing 2 nights ago. I heard the door slam behind me, my own doing, echoing like a gunshot. I snapped the notebook shut, shoved it in my coat, and bolted. My flashlight beam swung wildly as I ran, cough of adrenaline in my chest. I burst into the alley, boots slipping in mud, heart hammering. I didn't call dispatch. I didn't wait for backup. I jumped into the cruiser, locked the doors, and peeled out onto 6th. Rain plastered my windshield and I flicked the wipers frantic. I mashed the mic. 1-5 to dispatch, code 4, returning to service. I watched in the mirror as the bakery receded, lights cutting through fog. My mind reeled with the notebook's pages, the missing kid, the line I'd crossed. I'd found proof, real evidence of something deliberate, something sinister. But I couldn't lodge it in a report. Too many questions would follow. Internal affairs, press, lawsuits. I drove through the night, clutching the notebook against my chest. My shift ended before dawn. I never filed the supplement. I never turned over the notebook or photos. Instead, I parked at home and tossed the notebook on a shelf where I keep the casing, the boot, and other oddities I've collected over the years. I speak this now because if I put it in writing, I'll have to account for every choice. Better it stays here, in the dark, between the beats of a recorder. And that's the end of this watch. Unfinished, unresolved, carried in silence. I drove through the night without stopping. Every red light on 6th felt like a warning. My hands shook on the wheel. The notebook lay open on the passenger seat. Maps and footprints scrawled in ink. Rain pooled on the dash, drops rolling toward the bezel of the recorder. I needed to say this while it was fresh. I slipped the cruiser into an empty lot by the turn of the Century Mill on River Road. Rusted girders, shattered windows. A place forgotten by time. I killed the engine, and the world went silent, except for the soft patter of water on metal. I opened my door and slipped out. The notebook clutched to my chest, pages damp at the edges. The drift of fog curled around my boots. I crossed the lot toward a breach in the building's wall, stone crumbling. A doorway where the mill's heartbeat once roared. The air smelled of oil and mold. My beam caught rusted gears piled like bones. I thought of the missing teen, his jacket sleeve caught on the nail, his name scrawled on that page. He'd been here, scribbling maps of the bakery and the alley, trying to understand. What hunted him? I clicked on my flashlight and swept the cavernous space. Water dripped from overhead pipes, each drop a distant echo. I read the notebook's final entry. They come from below. The floor trembles at midnight. Don't look down. My breath caught. I glanced at my watch. 11:59 p.m., 30 seconds to the witching hour. The floor beneath my boots began to vibrate, soft at first, then a low rumble. I swallowed, heart hammering. I looked down at the concrete. I'd walked across it 100 times without a tremor. Now it hummed like a living thing. I inched toward the center of the room, pages of the notebook fanning out in the wind from a broken window. A shape shifted at the far wall, dark, elongated, limbed at odd angles. I raised the beam. The shape ducked behind a stack of crates. The rumble grew louder, matching the pounding in my chest. I pressed a hand to the notebook, half expecting the pages to flutter into the unseen. Then the floor cracked. A spiderweb fracture snaked from where I stood, splitting concrete, sending shards clattering. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. The shape reappeared. A figure hunched, faceless under a hood, perched atop an upturned crate. Beneath it, the fracture widened, black as an open wound. I raised the beam, and it receded. The figure slipped down into the crack, vanishing in a pulse of darkness. I reached out, flashlight trembling, but all I saw was the divide yawning at my feet. I leaned forward, needling for a glimpse of what lay beyond, but only heard my own ragged breath. The tremor subsided. I backed away, notebook fluttering closed in my jacket. My heart slowed, but fear pinned me in place. The hole sealed itself as if it had never opened. The crack tightened, then faded, lines of concrete knitting back together. I knelt and ran my fingers over the spot. Cold, smooth, unbroken. No trace of fracture, no sign of the thing I'd seen. A single raindrop fell onto the notebook's cover, smearing the ink of the last entry. I exhaled, voice catching. "You lied," I whispered to the page. "You said, 'Don't look down.'" The recorder's red light glowed, and I pressed it with a thumb. "This ends here," I said, voice low. "I won't write it in any file. I'll bury these pages along with the rest." I turned and fled the mill, the notebook pressed against my chest, boots echoing on stone. I leapt into the cruiser, doors slamming, and pulled onto River Road. Headlights cut through the mist as I receded, leaving the mill and its secrets behind. I parked at home before dawn, slipped inside, and laid the notebook on a shelf where it gathers dust. My recorder sits on the nightstand, blinking in the dark. When I wake, I'll type a simple log. Checked old mill. No disturbance found. But I'll feel the tremor under my feet when I first stand. And I'll remember the shape, the crack, the way the world folded beneath me that night. I drove home through the empty streets, the notebook tucked on the passenger seat like a wounded thing. My mind reeled with the image of that crack closing behind the figure, with the weight of the jacket sleeve in my coat, the tremor under my boots. I parked in the driveway, cut the engine, and sat in the dark with the recorder still running. I thought I could leave it buried in that notebook, let it gather dust on a shelf. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mill's broken gears, heard the drip of water in that silent room. I felt the pulse of something alive under the concrete. I felt the teen's fear, how hard he must have tried to map the unknown before he vanished. I pulled the notebook from my coat and leafed to the final page. The words had blurred in the rain. They said no one would see. They were wrong. I flipped it closed, slid it into the envelope I'd marked "Do Not Open," and pressed it between old uniforms in my closet. I locked the door. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling, the recorder's red light blinking across the ceiling like a distant star. I realized how easy it is to hide the cracks in our world, how a concrete floor can mend itself, how a missing person can vanish without a trace, how a police report can gloss over truths too strange to write down. In the morning, I'll log my shift as routine, check the old mill, found nothing. I'll hand in my notebook, minus the last pages, and carry on. But I'll keep the recorder, its red light a pulse in the dark. Because the real story lives in the spaces between my words. It lives in the tremor beneath the floor. It lives in the shape that slipped away into darkness. And that presence follows me home, where I'll lie awake knowing the world is bigger than our reports. And that is all I'll ever know. I'm on the recorder now. It's just past midnight, and I'm in the cruiser off Route 17, south edge of town. I was flagged down by dispatch for a routine traffic stop. Van drifting between lanes, brake light out. I drove up behind it on that stretch where cornfields press in on both sides, tall stalks whispering under the moon. No streetlights out there, just headlights cutting through darkness, and the radio static. I flicked on my overheads and watched the white van coast to a stop beside a broken wooden fence. Nothing else moving. I stepped out and felt the cold air seeping through my jacket. I introduced myself, name, badge number, reason. The driver, a Hispanic man, kept his hands on the wheel, fingers tapping. His eyes were calm, too calm, fixed on the cracked pavement. The passenger took a breath and asked if he could pop the hatch to fix the brake light himself. Said he was a mechanic. I believed him. I told dispatch I'd step out to check. I left the engine running, radio mic clipped on, ready. I lifted the hatch. The van's cargo space was packed tight. Cardboard boxes, toolboxes, cooler, nothing that stood out. But when I bent down, flashlight sweeping, I saw the barrels of 2 shotguns propped against the spare tire. Shotgun barrels wrapped in cloth. I froze. My hand caught on my holster. Radio went quiet in my ear. I felt the weight of what I'd just seen. I told them it was nothing serious, just a routine check. Didn't want to spook whoever was in the passenger seat. I closed the hatch, stepped back. The passenger gave me a nod. No apology, no explanation. I said, "Mind telling me what that's about?" He shrugged, said he carried them for protection, worked late nights hauling supplies. I said, "Okay, run that through dispatch," and radioed for backup. My voice was steady, my throat tight. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the van. Both side windows were tinted pitch black. I felt like I was staring at 2 empty squares. No sign of what was inside. The driver was silent, shoulders slumping. The passenger's hands were clasped tight on the seat between them. They didn't argue. They didn't try to leave. They just sat there. Backup arrived. 2 cruisers pulled up with lights off, engines idling. I waved them in. The officers approached, guns drawn. They signaled for me to stay back. I took a few steps away, hands at my sides. In that moment, the air held its breath. We opened the doors in unison. Shouts cut through the night. They found plastic bags full of white powder, bricks wrapped in tape, scales, zip ties. I saw their faces when they reached in, shock, relief, anger. They cuffed the driver and passenger. They read them rights. They pulled them out, hands behind backs, and led them to the pavement. The driver's face was blank, like he'd been waiting for this. The passenger's eyes flickered to mine, only for a second, then dropped. As they loaded the evidence onto the trunk, I walked back to my cruiser and sat down. I closed the hatch to my cruiser, the click echoing in the stillness. I pulled off my hat and ran a hand through my hair. Headlights from passing cars streaked across the windshield. I wanted to write it all down. The guns, the windows, their faces. But I didn't. In my report, I wrote, routine traffic stop for broken taillight. Upon inspection, narcotics and firearms located. 2 suspects arrested. That was it. No mention of the shotguns tucked between toolboxes. No detail about their windows blacked out, or the way the passenger's voice trembled when he asked for a chance to fix the light. I didn't write why I felt my heart hammering when I closed the hatch, why I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be standing in the corn. I drove back to the station with the whole van in tow, my siren off, my headlights cutting a tunnel through darkness. I kept glancing at the empty seat beside me, imagining the passenger's photo. He'd slipped a crumpled picture into my cruiser's cup holder before they took him away. I found it later when I unlocked the car to retrieve my radio. A faded print of a girl's face, chin tilted up, hair in braids, eyes bright. Someone's mother, sister, daughter. I slipped it into my pocket and left it there. When I logged back in, I typed the basic facts. I omitted the parts that defied logic. The passenger's polite ask, the gun barrels wrapped like tools, the oppressive quiet in the field. I left out how I saw movement in the corn as I walked to the passenger door, like a figure leaning in to watch. No one else saw it. No one else asked. Later, in the empty locker room, I sat under the fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. I thumbed the photo between my fingers, hopped in my patrol jacket and headed home. I didn't record any of that on tape. Not the pounding in my chest as I climbed into bed. Not the way the picture burned against my palm. I fell asleep to the hum of my own thoughts, wondering how many others nights like that had slipped through the cracks. Nights when I saw more than I wrote down. Nights when I carried a confession in silence. I didn't mention how I kept the photograph tacked to my mirror at home, because I knew if I did, I'd have to explain why I pulled it from the evidence locker. I didn't log how often I thought about her, where she was, who she belonged to. I didn't write that when I closed my eyes, I saw those shotguns again. I didn't note that sometimes, I swear, I hear footsteps in the cornfields outside my window, soft and deliberate, watching me back. I told dispatch the next morning I was fine. Checked off my shift, weighed in on briefings. I sat in the same seat, put on the same uniform. But I never erased that night from my mind. It never left the recording. It never went in the file. And so, I'm the only one carrying it now. I left off at the station, but that's not where the night ended. I drove back out to the fields before dawn broke. No one asked why. I needed to see that fence again, the one beside the spot where I first flicked on my lights. Corn had grown since. I parked the cruiser at the edge and killed the engine. My breath curled in the air. The radio sat silent, its mic button gathering dust. I stepped into the rows. The stalks pressed against my arms, rustling like distant voices. I remember thinking, this place doesn't belong on any map after dark. The moon slid behind clouds and the night went pitch black. I patted my chest for the flashlight. I always kept it there, clicked it on. The beam trembled in my hand. I swept left, then right, tracing shapes that vanished when I blinked. I kept going until I reached that broken fence. Splinters of wood, half buried in soil, rusted nails catching the light. I knelt and ran a finger over the grain. In the dirt, footprints, 2 sets. One larger, booted, mine, the other smaller, softer, like someone in plain sneakers. I crouched, leaned closer. There was a drag mark too, like something heavy had been moved across the top rail. I closed my eyes and replayed. The passenger had slipped that photo into my cruiser. A child's face, bright, hopeful. Was that why he wanted to stop here? I stood up and shined the light across the field. Wet blades of grass gleamed. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. I swallowed hard. My pulse thudded in my ears. That night, I thought I saw a figure at the edge of the beam. Tall silhouette, half hidden between stalks. When I flicked my wrist to track it, nothing was there. I kept the light trained on the spot for a minute, waiting for something to move. But only the grass shifted. I walked the perimeter of the van's resting place, where they'd towed it. They left it overnight on impound, under a floodlight. The yellow glow turned the van's white paint sickly. I remember the way the guns glinted where they'd been laid out on the hood during evidence processing. Shotguns with cloth still wrapped around their stocks. I crouched by the front wheel and picked up a flattened soda can, crumpled and stuck to the pavement. I tucked it into my pocket, felt compelled to take something tangible back from the scene. I still carry it sometimes, smells of oil and asphalt. Dawn approached in slow bruises of purple. I stood and tucked the flashlight away. My boots sank in muddy tracks I'd made when patrolling. I looked back one last time. No sign of footprints besides mine. No sign of anyone watching. Only a van driver and passenger handed off to deputies. But I knew better. I'd felt someone's gaze drifting over my shoulder when they took the photo. Felt it in the click of the hatch closing behind me. I returned to the cruiser and sat in the driver's seat. My uniform was damp with dew. I reached for the recorder and clicked it off. My hand shook. I remembered I never pressed stop last night, so recording still ran, capturing the patter of my heartbeat and my ragged breathing. I hit stop, but then realized the tape clicked empty. I'd recorded my shift's end, but not what I'd seen in the fields. Not the shadows that slipped between rows. Not the photo folded in my pocket. 2 days later, I opened the evidence room to retrieve that van's inventory list. My partner found me there, crouched in front of the shelves, rifling through papers. He asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. I pressed the photograph into his hand, wordless, and walked away. Later, he told me he'd tried to log it as personal property, but we'd lost it in the shuffle. He shrugged it off like any other mistake. I didn't note it in the report, it stayed off the record. My partner never mentioned it. But every time I pass that lot where they hold evidence, I look for a white envelope with a picture inside. It's never there. I checked the official documentation. Nothing. Just the forms noting weapons, narcotics, suspects, charges. Nothing about the photograph. Nothing about the way I found it, about why I kept it. That's the problem with erased incidents. They leave gaps you can't explain. They fold into your memory like nightmares you can't share. I had to write a formal statement to qualify for commendation, for alerting backup before approaching. I got a plaque, a pat on the back, a write-up in the morning bulletin. In that write-up, they called me professional, by the book, unflappable. They never saw the corner of my eye go slack when I lifted that hatch. Never heard my voice catch on the radio when I whispered, "Holy shit." Sometimes I replay that night in my mind unprompted, like a broken tape loop. I see the van's blacked-out windows, the barrels hiding in shadows. I hear dispatches crackle, turning cold. I feel the weight of the photo in my breast pocket, pressing like a secret heart. I remember kneeling by that fence and tracing footprints that didn't belong to me. And I remember, most of all, how easy it was to let it slip through the cracks, unspoken, undocumented. I spent the next few nights running those same roads, chasing ghosts in the dark. Every shift, I'd find a reason to pass that fence, sometimes on foot, other times in the cruiser, headlights scanning the field edges. I'd park where the van first stopped, sit with the engine idling, and listen to the radio chatter for any sign of normalcy. But normal never showed. Instead, I'd think back to the passenger's eyes when he slipped that photograph into my cruiser, those brief flickers of desperation. One night, I rolled down the window as I pulled alongside the fence. Rain had fallen earlier, and the ground was slick. The air tasted of damp earth. I heard the corn stalks rustle like someone whispering your name when you know you're alone. I clicked the mic off and closed my eyes, listening to the patter of rain against the hood. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle behind the stalks. I slammed the door shut, clicked the lock. Rainwater slid down my windshield in rivulets that distorted the darkness outside. I reached for the flashlight again, but the beam cut just a short tunnel. I leaned forward, peered through the wet glass. The shuffle stopped. In the shifting black, I thought I saw a silhouette, tall and thin, like a scarecrow tipped forward. It vanished when a gust swept through the field. My pulse spiked. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination, the hush of wind through corn. But when I pressed my forehead against the glass, I could feel the heat of someone watching from outside that tiny glass box of light. I left my cruiser and grabbed my coat. The rain had eased to a fine mist, and my boots stuck to the mud as I pushed through stalks. The field was a maze. Each step sank. My flashlight revealed sudden dips in the ground. I nearly tripped over something half buried. I stopped and knelt. It was the edge of a cardboard box, taped shut. I yanked it free, mud caked one side, and pried it open. Inside were envelopes, yellowed and creased, with no return address. My flashlight's beam skimmed names scrawled on them. Children, mothers, siblings, return addresses scratched out. I slammed the box shut. Heart thundering, I jammed the envelopes inside my coat pocket. I flicked the beam across the rows. Nothing but stalks, bending in the wind. I sprinted back to the fence line, mud splattering my uniform. When I cleared the last stalk, I fell forward and caught myself on a fence post. Rain slid down my neck as I pressed my hand to my chest, breathing hard. The van's spot lay empty under the streetlight's glow. No sign of the vehicle, no sign of footprints besides mine in the box. I pulled out the envelopes one by one. Names: Maria Alvarez, Daniel Perez, Rosa Sanchez. I recognized them from unsolved cases, missing persons, hushed disappearances. Each had a date, months before the van stop. I gripped the envelopes and turned toward the road, mind racing. Flashbacks of the van's tinted windows, shotguns, the passenger's calm apology when I took the package. He'd said, "We're just protecting family." I shoved the envelopes into an evidence bag I'd left in my cruiser, zipping it tight. Back at the station that morning, I slid the sealed bag onto my desk under the pile of routine paperwork. No one asked about the overnight field excursion. My sergeant waved as he passed. "Anything strange last night?" I said nothing. He moved on. I kept my head down. The envelopes sat beneath official files, unlogged, unreported. Weeks passed. I began piecing together timelines. Each envelope corresponded to a missing person report that had gone cold. The families never heard back. Investigations stalled. I flipped through files in my off hours, dates, descriptions, last known whereabouts. I realized the van had held more than drugs. It carried parts of disappearance cases, evidence stashed to evade detection. The passengers' rifles weren't for protection. They were to silence anyone who found the evidence. I reported nothing. Instead, I trailed leads quietly. One afternoon, I showed the photographs to a detective I trusted. Quiet guy, 20 years on the force. I left the envelopes on his desk, no explanation. When I came back an hour later, they were gone. He wouldn't talk about them. "Too messy," he said. "You want to go rogue, go alone." He slid them into a drawer. I never saw them again. I started doing unmarked runs, checking abandoned barns, old barns by that fence line, basements and empty farmhouses. Sometimes I found muddy footprints on concrete floors, hints of someone dragging something heavy. Other times I found nothing but the echo of spray-painted X's on wood beams. Each X marked a spot where someone vanished. Barns sealed off, rumored to hold secrets. I took photos with my personal phone, geotagged them, kept them off the record. I cataloged them in a notebook no one else knew existed. At night, I'd sit in the cruiser at the end of the road, flipping through these notes. I'd whisper into the recorder, "Barn at mile marker 23, floor stained, X in red, no official file. Next to cornfield, fence broken. Footprint too large for me, no other prints, no answers." The recorder picked up my whispered pleas, but I never transferred them anywhere. It stayed in my glove box, growing heavier as the nights wore on. Then came the incident at Miller's farm. I got a call, suspicious noise complaint at an abandoned farmhouse. Owner moved years ago, building left to rot. I cruised in with dispatch's routine chatter, nothing of interest. The house sat dark, shutters missing. I stepped inside, flashlight swinging over peeling wallpaper. In the living room, I saw a single chair facing the empty fireplace. On the seat lay a bundle of letters tied with twine, yellowed, brittle. I unwrapped them. Names acutely familiar. Envelopes from the box in the corn. Maria's name scrawled again, Rosa's again. The letters spilled onto the floor. They took her. Don't trust him. Tell someone. I stepped back. The beam caught footprints and dust. Sneakers, small, children's sizes. They led up the stairs and then stopped before the attic door. The door was ajar. I didn't go up. I called for backup, but my voice was calm. I kept the recorder running, whispering, "Attic door open, letters inside chair, footprints too small to be mine." But I clipped the recorder back into the glove box when the cruisers arrived. I handed them the complaint report. Noise complaint, no signs of entry. Found correspondence belonging to missing persons. Evidence turned over. That was it. They filed it under vagrants and junk mail. The desk sergeant never followed up. I watched the letters vanish into the evidence lockers, unspoken, untraced. I kept driving back at night, shining my beam at that door. It never moved. No footprints after mine, no sign of life. Only the hush of wood settling, the slow sigh of a house breathing again. I don't write about any of this. I don't log it. I don't tell dispatch. They think they know me as the guy who finds shotguns in vans and turns in a clean report. They don't know I've got envelopes with children's names stuffed in my locker. They don't know I keep mapping out barns with red X's. They don't know that I've recorded every whisper of evidence on a tape that's never seen daylight. This is part 3. There are 2 more. I'll keep pressing record. I'll keep checking those fields and barns. I'll keep gathering what never made it into the file, because someone has to remember. I didn't expect to find anything else after Miller's farm, but I can't stop now. So I drive back out there, even when no call comes through. I park at the same cracked pavement where the van first stopped, where the fence lies broken and the cornstalks lean away like silent witnesses. I hit record again. My breath fogs on the glass as I peer into the darkness. The moon is gone. Just an empty sky smudged with clouds. I click my mic on, then off. I'm talking to myself, but I know it's all I've got. When I push into the field, it's like walking into memory. Each stalk I part feels like a throat whispering your name, like the forgotten victims whispering mine. I keep my boots low to avoid tripping. The ground is dimpled with holes, old burrows or shell casings, I can't tell. My flashlight beam cuts a narrow tunnel through the black. I sweep it over the fence splinters, the muddy footprints, the ghostly path back to the farmhouse where Miller's letters waited. I follow the footprints first. The larger booted prints I left in the mud. I let them guide me deeper. I slip on wet corn husks and stumble, catching myself on a stalk. The beam lands on something dark wedged between two plants. I crouch, kneel in the dirt. It's a length of rope, frayed and caked with soil. Not like drag rope, more like boundary marker. The passenger in that van might have used it to tie a tarp. Or worse. My hand trembles as I pick it up. I smell the earth and a faint copper tang. I loop it around my finger and unwind the coil. There are fibers, synthetic, industrial grade, not farm rope. Why would someone leave that here? I shrug it into my coat pocket and push on. I crest a rise and see the farmhouse's silhouette, its broken window panes glinting. The doors still ajar, no sound. The rain from days ago has stained the clapboards. I check my recorder. It's still rolling. I click the flashlight off and slip inside. The floorboards moan under my weight. I inch forward, the beam cutting through gloom to reveal the letters splayed on the chair. I hear my own breath echo. I reach out, fingers hovering over the crisp pages. A draft scours the room, cold enough to see my breath. I steady the beam on a line of text. He comes when you least expect it. Close your windows. The handwriting is frantic, angry. I shuffle forward and follow a trail of muddy smudges, footprints leading from the chair toward a hallway. I step in and shine the light down the narrow corridor. The walls are spray-painted with X's, thin red lines scrawled over peeling floral wallpaper. Each X crosses out a name. Miller's Farm, Broken Gate Barn, Old Blacksmith Shed. Under each name, scribbled dates. Now, at the bottom, the farmhouse name with a final X, and next to it, my own name. Underneath, a date 2 nights from now. I step back, knocking against a table that rattles. The beam wavers. I swallow and force myself to shine it higher. Where the corridor ends is a narrow staircase. The footprints on the floor lead up. My mind screams to turn and run. My training says stay low, call backup, secure the scene. But my instincts say, no, I need to see this. I need to know who's writing my name there. I ascend. Each step creaks. I reach the landing, pausing where the beam catches on a mirror leaning against the far wall. In its reflection, I see myself. Uniform, stained with mud, eyes wide, shoulders tensed. I see the rope coiled around my wrist, the letters bulging in my coat pocket. I catch my own gaze, and it's like looking at a stranger. A haunted man chasing paper trails through abandoned homes. I know I'm in over my head. I know no one will ever believe this, but I can't stop now. I click the mic off and whisper into it. Upstairs. Mirror. My name, the date, corridor. I pause. I'll keep going. Then click it back on. Upstairs is worse. The air smells of rot and mildew. The beam flickers across doors, one at left, one at right. Marsing of butter yellow paint peeling. I approach the left one. It's cracked open, splintered wood. I push it slowly. It groans and swings inward. Inside is a child's room, stripped to the studs. No furniture, only a single bed frame, bent metal, wires dangling. On the floor, a small shoe, scuffed, toddler size. I stoop and pick it up, turning it over in my hand. On the sole, scrawled in black marker, Maria. My heart hammers so loud I can almost hear it in the recorder. I set the shoe on the bed frame. I shine the beam across the walls. Another X over children's bedroom. A third scribbled line beneath. Never alone. I step back. The beam catches on the rope at my wrist. I realize it's tight enough to leave an imprint. I yank at it, release the loop, it falls to the floor. I cradle the shoe and step out, closing the door softly. I push on toward the right-hand door. My hand trembles on the knob. I push in. There's a closet, empty. But on the back wall, a cluster of photographs pinned with rusty nails. Images torn from family albums. Parents, children, birthdays. Smiling faces. One by one, someone has X'd out the eyes with black ink. The eyes turn into dark voids. I swallow. I know those eyes. They belong to the people named in the envelopes. The missing. Each photo shows one of them looking happy, alive. Now dead to whoever cut out the eyes. I step back, and the beam lands on the bed. Under the mattress is a hollowed-out space. A small square I can reach with my fingers. I crouch, pull the mattress aside, slide my hand in. It closes on something smooth and cold. An old police badge. The communicator radio from a decommissioned precinct, the kind you see in evidence lockers. I pull it out and click it on. The speaker crackles, static, and then a voice I know. Dispatch, hours old. Units 12-3, code 4. All clear. I yank the badge free, leave the radio in my jacket pocket. I stand, eyes flicking to the floor. More footprints, smaller, leading out of the room. I shine the beam at the stairwell. They've left me a trail out. I realize this was never my investigation. It was a path set for me. A breadcrumb trail of horrors. Someone wanted me to find these things. Wanted me to know the missing never vanished. They were hidden. I gather the shoe, badge, photographs, handheld radio, and tuck them into my coat. My heart is pounding, sweat cold on my back. I click the mic off, but my voice echoes in my skull. I slip down the stairs, careful not to disturb a beam of moonlight cutting across the hall. I push open the front door, step into the emptied porch, and exhale into the night. Outside, the corn stalks sway like spectators. The field stretches, endless. I turn back once and see the farmhouse silhouette staring at me. No lights, no movement, only the hush of wind through the stalks. I slip through the broken fence and head for my cruiser. My boots crunch on gravel. I think of the passenger's photo, Maria's shoe, the X's over my name, the date. It's coming for me. It's always been coming. I slide into the driver's seat. I leave the headlights off. The dashboard glows green. I pull the recorder from the glove box, click it on. Found badge, radio, photographs, child's shoe, name X'd. Date's coming. Someone's been mapping victims in corn, barns, farms. They want me to follow. They know my name, my schedule, I'm next. I click record off. I drive away without sirens, without lights. I keep my head low, eyes on the road. I carry this. Maria's shoe, that old badge, and a phone full of photos I'll never log. I know there's one more place, the last X on the farmhouse wall, labeled with my name and tomorrow's date. I can't ignore it. I drive straight through the night toward that final address. It's at the edge of town, an old grain silo by the railroad tracks, abandoned for years. The air in my cruiser tastes of coffee and adrenaline. I keep the recorder running, tucked under my leg where no one can see. My eyes drift to the glove box, where I left the radio from the farmhouse. I haven't turned it on since. I don't want to hear dispatch. I want only this voice, this story to guide me. The road narrows as I approach the tracks. Rusted rails shine in my headlights. The silo looms, 11 stories high, dark as a void against the sky. I park 50 feet away and kill the engine. Radio static hisses in the background. I unclip my mic and hold it to my chest. My hand trembles, I click record. The gravel crunches under my boots as I walk toward the silo's base. The ground is broken concrete, weeds pushing through cracks. I keep low, flashlight in my free hand, badge and shoe and radio stuffed into my coat, too heavy, but I carry them like talismans. They're proof, they're evidence, they're both curse and confession. I circle the silo, eyes peeled for X's or footprints. Nothing. Only the moon's reflection on broken glass from windows high above. A metal door stands ajar, its latch rusted through. I push it inward with my shoulder. It creaks, the sound bouncing inside. I step inside and the beam catches dust motes drifting in shafts of moonlight. Inside, it's vast and silent. I shine the light upward, layers of catwalks, ladders, broken railings. The air smells of grain dust and mold. It's cold and still. My breath puffs in the beam. I keep moving, following graffiti on the concrete walls. Red X's scrawled at each bolt and joint. First floor, second floor, up to the 10th. I climb a ladder that rattles under my weight, hand over hand, each rung echoing in the void. At the 10th catwalk, I pause. My heart drums. I shine the light along the railing and see my footprints. Fresh, muddy prints leading from floor to platform. Then I see the X, painted on the wall beyond the railing, perfectly at eye level. Under it, in shaky black ink, my name and today's date. I stare at it, chest tightening. Someone was waiting for me here. I swallow and press forward onto the platform. The narrow walkway creaks. I keep the beam pointed at the wall. The X drips like blood. Beneath it, etched into the concrete, "We see you." My pulse races. I shine the light ahead and see a door, an access hatch set into the wall. No latch, only hinges. I pry it open and step inside. It's a small room, maybe 6 by 6 feet, filled with shelves. Each shelf holds objects: a beat-up cruiser hubcap, a patrol cap, an evidence bag of grain samples, a handheld spotlight, cans of pepper spray, boots, gloves, gear from every shift of mine, every piece I ever wore or used. In the center, on a pedestal of stacked crates, sits a single photograph pinned to a clipboard. It's me, taken on a routine call 6 months ago, standing by a burned-out trailer. I stare, my face pale, drawn, unaware I was ever photographed. I recognize the assignment, noise complaint at the trailer. I remember nothing about being photographed. I step closer. Underneath my photo is another, the van passenger, eyes downcast, holding that child's picture. Below that, the farmhouse letters, the ladder at Miller's farm, the photographs from the closet, all pinned in chronological order. Each image is a chapter in this story, arranged like evidence in a case file, my case. At the bottom, taped to the pedestal, is a slip of paper with a time, midnight. I look at my watch, 11:47 p.m. 3 minutes until midnight. The date matches the one under my name on the 10 outside. Someone set this. Someone gave me a schedule. I feel a chill, fear, dread, something colder. I reach for the clipboard and lift my photo. On the back, scrawled in cramped handwriting, "Follow the story to the end." I almost drop it. My knees threaten to buckle. I shine the beam over the other shelves. On one, a battered recorder identical to mine, the tape door open. On another, a half-burned notebook with my handwriting, locations, dates, initials. Someone stole my private log, copied it, curated it here. I listen. The silo groans as wind pushes through broken windows. I step back, pressing against the far wall. My flashlight beam flickers. My heart pounds so loud I can hear it in my ears. I click my recorder off and press it to my chest. Silence. Then a soft scrape on metal behind me. My breath freezes. The beam scans the room, landing on a shadow at the hatch. No shape, just darkness. Then a shift, a footstep on the metal grating. I swallow, sweat beating at my hairline. Instinct screams, "Get out." But my voice cracks as I whisper into the mic I've clipped back on. Someone is here. They knew everything. They collected all the evidence I hid. They're watching. The door behind me swings shut with a clang. The beam catches it halfway closed. I rush to it, but the handle won't budge. I slam my shoulder into it. Then again. The metal cracks. A breath of wind slips beneath the gap. My recorder picks up the thud of my heart. I turn and face the pedestal, my story laid bare. Then I hear it, soft and urgent, a whisper, so faint I can't be sure. I lean close to the wall. The whisper coils around me. "Thank you for telling our story." My breath catches. I scramble to the hatch, jamming my shoulder against the steel. It rattles, buds out. I shove, jade panic rising. It gives way enough to wedge my shoulder. I hear that floor above creaking. Someone is descending toward me. Slow, deliberate steps on the catwalk. I wrench the hatch open and squeeze through, dropping to the 10th catwalk. The beam swings wildly. I shine it up, empty, no one. Only open air and the night sky beyond broken beams. I sprint down the ladder, each rung a heartbeat, splinters tearing my gloves. I burst onto the floor. I don't look back. I run through the mill of rusted equipment and fallen pipes, cutting to the door where I first entered. The gravel outside catches me with its crunch. I don't stop until I'm back at my cruiser. I slam the door, lock it. Recorder still in my hand. I catch my reflection in the window. Face pale, eyes wide, uniform torn at the sleeves. I press record again. This is the end. They led me here. They knew my steps. They thank me for telling. But I didn't finish. I'm the final piece. They want me to vanish next. I can't keep running. I press stop. I drop the recorder into the passenger seat. I pull a belt from the glove box. It's heavy, industrial grade. I loop it around my wrist, knot it tight. I open the cruiser door, step out into the night. The moon has broken free of clouds. The silo stands behind me, silent and watching. I stepped off the pavement and into the grass, feeling each blade press against my boots. The belt cut into my skin, a reminder that I'd come prepared for something I couldn't fully explain. I didn't look back at the grain silo. I kept my eyes fixed on the stretch of dark road ahead, where my headlights faded into nothing. My pulse was slow, calibrated, but every nerve felt raw, like I'd just peeled away the last layer of myself and now had nothing left to hide. My recorder sat on the passenger seat, blinking its red light. It held all the fragments, the van, the shotguns, the photograph of that child's face, the letters at Miller's farm, the rope, the X's, the footprints, the shelves of badges and radios, my own photograph pinned under broken lights. I'd followed their story through barns, farmhouses, fields of corn, and now they'd lured me to this end. I thought, maybe I'm not meant to walk away. I fumbled in my coat pocket for my phone. No signal, of course. I'd known that, but I needed to see the time. It was just past 1:15 a.m. The date under my name, and under that ominous midnight note, was now past. They'd given me a deadline. I'd missed it. Or maybe this was the deadline, to record everything and disappear. I turned off the belt's knot and let it fall. My wrists stung. The night air felt sharper against bare skin. I ran my hands through my hair and heard my boots crunch on gravel where the road meets the pasture. I could swear I heard static, like the recorder's hiss, coming from the fields at my right. But when I swept the beam across the stalks, they stood motionless. I took a deep breath and reached into the cruiser for the recorder. The metal was warm. I clicked it on and placed it between my knees, leaning forward so my voice would be clear, urgent. I'm not safe, I said. My voice cracked against the silence. But I can't stop now. This story demands an ending, even if it kills me. I've carried pieces of it in my pocket and my thoughts. For weeks, it's become part of me. I paused and swallowed. The night felt alive around me. Wings of insects brushing by, the distant chug of a train minutes away. I steadied my breathing and went on. I walked away from the silo because I thought distance would protect me. But distance doesn't erase what I found there. They know my steps, my calls, my fears. They mapped me, my shifts, my routes. Like they mapped those barns and fields. Each X was a competition, a challenge, a promise. You're next. I clicked the mic off and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield was bloodless, haunted. I heard that whisper again, softer than before. Thank you for telling our story. It felt like an echo inside my skull. I shut my eyes and heard rustling from the passenger seat. I opened them to find the belt coiled neatly on the floorboard, exactly where I'd dropped it. There was no breeze. I clicked the mic back on. They're here, I whispered. They never left. The recorder picked up the click of the seatbelt latch. I must have nudged it when I leaned in. I cranked the knob to turn the engine over. The dashboard lights flared, then died. The battery read 0. The headlights flickered out. I sank back, blinking into darkness. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam stabbed at the horizon. Nothing but empty road. Then, at the edge of the light, I saw a pair of eyes glint. Too close to be wildlife. They were set in a face I couldn't fully make out, half hidden by corn husks and the brim of an old patrol cap. I heard breathing, measured and slow. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered into the black. The figure didn't move. It stood at the boundary between road and field. Rain begun to fall, fat drops sizzling on the hood. My recorder was off. Its battery must have died with the cruiser. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was black. No light at all, just me and the shape waiting. I pressed my back into the seat. I felt his breath, or her breath, whisper on the glass. Then the figure raised an arm and pointed at me. No weapon, just a gloved hand trailing droplets of water. I swallowed and clicked my flashlight off, plunging us both into darkness. My hand found the recorder on the seat. I clicked it on one last time. The red light shone faintly. "You want this told?" I said into the void. "Then listen." My voice was steady, as calm as I could muster. I opened the door. Cold rain hit my face. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out into the field, feet sunk into mud, corn pressing in around me like fingers dragging me forward. I kept the recorder above my head, pointing at the silhouette. The rain turned the tape recorder's hiss into a hiss of static, a rasp of furious sky. The figure stepped forward until it was close enough that my beam revealed an old badge hung around its neck. Mine, I realized. My own badge, tarnished and scratched, dangling at the end of a frayed cord. I heard a whisper through the falling rain. "Your badge seals our silence." I steadied the recorder, aiming it at the badge. The owner of the badge stepped into the light. I saw his eyes, hollow, familiar. It was the passenger from the van, older, gaunt, skin pale under the brim. He mouthed one word, so soft I barely heard it. "Finish." I exhaled. I clicked stop. The recorder's red light blinked out. I stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, heart a slow drum. I realized then there was no escape from this story, no safe harbor, no final report. The truth would follow me as long as I lived. It was already inside me, etched in footprints in mud and X's on walls in the weight of a child's photograph. I let the recorder lay in my hand, and I walked forward, leaving the figure, the badge, the corridor of corn behind. I heard the rain patter on the leaves, a lullaby for the damned. I knew there'd be no rescue, no backup, no clean report filed at dawn, just me, disappearing into the night. I didn't write this down. I filed the basic assault call and ticked the box, then I drove back to the station. But I still hear the pulse of that night whenever I close my eyes. It was just after midnight. I'd picked up a graveyard shift to cover for a buddy who called in sick. I was 2 weeks out of the academy, still learning to choke down coffee at 3 a.m. without tasting the rot. The streets were empty, save for a few taillights fading into fog. My cruiser's headlights cut through the haze as I clipped on the radio and scanned the call sheet. Assault in progress. Strip mall parking lot. Caller hears fighting, heavy breathing. Units en route. I turned onto the service road and saw the neon flicker of a shuttered video store. Wet asphalt glistened under my tires. I killed the siren halfway down the block, partly because it was routine and partly because I wanted the neighborhood to stay asleep. No need to rattle windows for something that might be nothing more than a bar fight spilled into the lot. I parked my car 15 yards from the curb, engine ticking as it cooled. My heart was already tapping out a frantic rhythm. I told myself it was just adrenaline, nothing personal. I checked my flashlight and cuff pouch, fingers brushing the hard plastic of my weapon. I wiped my sweaty palm on my uniform shirt, forcing my shoulders down. Keep it simple, I told myself. Then I saw them. 2 figures under the flickering glow of a broken lamp by the shoe store. One man knelt, back hunched like a bird in prayer. The other stood over him, gripping a long metal pipe. Iron, maybe from a shelving rack or an old signpost. He held it like a conductor's baton, raised above his head, ready to bring the sky down on the kneeling man. The crowd of onlookers, a dozen faces half hidden in shadow, stayed frozen at the storefront entrance, as if they'd been trapped in glass cases. I got out with my flashlight in my left hand and my pistol drawn in my right. The radio clicked off behind me. My chest felt tight. "Freeze! Drop the pipe!" My voice cracked in the cold air, but I repeated, louder this time, "Drop it now." He paused. The pipe wavered. For a heartbeat, I thought I had control. The kneeling man looked up at me with eyes wide in terror, hands pressed together like he was begging God for mercy. But then, the guy with the pipe tilted his head, and a slow, crooked smile spread across his face, like he'd been waiting for me all along. My knuckles whitened on the grip of my revolver. "Thank God you're here," he gasped in a voice that sounded relieved. He held up the pipe, not as a weapon, but like a cane. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked at me like I was part of the script, stepping on cue. Behind him, the victim's eyes flickered between me and the pipe wielder, as if he understood they were playing some terrible game. I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't how suspects behaved. They didn't say, "Thank God," right before they smashed someone's skull. I felt every muscle in my neck tighten. The radio crackled. Backup ETA 2 minutes. 2 minutes now felt like the length of a lifetime. I tried to steady my voice. "Sir, what's going on here? Why are you hitting him?" I edged forward, keeping my feet planted so I could move if I had to. "Drop the pipe and back away." He turned halfway, studying me. Then he laughed, a short, breathy sound that echoed against the empty storefronts. "Arrest him," he said, voice low. "He's one of them." I blinked. One of who? My words felt small. I was trained to ask questions like that, to draw out a suspect's story. But his eyes were darting over my shoulder, as if looking behind me, at something I couldn't see. He shifted the pipe to his left hand and let it rest casually across his shoulder. "He's been following me," he said, tone urgent now. "He's been watching, tracking me down. They're everywhere." He pointed at the kneeling man. "He's one of them." I glanced at the victim. He shook his head frantically, voice hoarse with pleading. "Please, officer, he's delusional. He's not listening. He's going to kill me." I swallowed and forced out, "Okay. Sir, we'll figure this out. I need you to put the pipe down." My pistol hand felt heavy. My flashlight hand trembled. He stood silent. Then he took a step forward, into the dim ring of light cast by my flashlight. The grin vanished, his lips pressed into a thin line. He stared at me for a long moment without blinking. Then he tilted his head and whispered, "You talk to me with no silent words." Silence stretched so tight I thought my eardrums might burst. I realized I didn't know what he heard. I didn't know what he understood. I felt raw, exposed, like I had no armor except this uniform, which felt thinner by the second. I tried again. "Sir, I'm here to help you. I can get you help." My voice shook. "Drop the pipe." He shook his head slowly. Then he swung the pipe in a lazy arc. The kneeling man braced for impact, but didn't move fast enough. The pipe caught his temple. He collapsed to his side with a wet thud. His hands still twitched, like he was reaching for something that wasn't there. I fired. I remember the thought, I don't want to do this. I remember the flash of the muzzle, the roar in my ears. I remember time splintering as the first shot struck his side. He flinched, staggered. I fired again, down at the mound of his back. I aimed low, hoping to stop him, not kill him. But you don't control what the bullet does once it leaves the barrel. He went down, flat. The metal pipe clattered across the pavement, cylinder out of time with his body. I holstered and rushed in, hands shaking, voice breaking. "Medic, medic." They told me later he died on the table. Hepatic artery severed. The victim downstairs lost part of his ear. The post-mortem called it blunt trauma, compound fracture. I called it a crisis that went wrong. I left that scene with my report saying, "Suspect incapacitated." Then went home and slept like a stone. Never wrote about the silent words. Never wrote about the way he smiled when I arrived. Never wrote how my own voice sounded to me when he spoke, louder in my head than my pistol. I've taught this story to rookies as a case study in de-escalation now. I tell them, keep your distance, stay sharp, watch for mental illness. But I never tell them about the silence. I never tell them how those silent words still echo behind my eyes. I filed my report under suspect incapacitated, no further incident. And I drove off into that damp night, but as soon as I punched in to clear the call, something in my gut wouldn't let me move on. I kept the cruiser idling at the station bay, hands still wet on the wheel, staring out at the lot where yellow bulbs cut long shadows across gravel. A heavy radio silence filled the cab. Even after I radioed backup, cleared the scene, no voices came back. I felt pinned under a weight I couldn't name. When you're a rookie, you learn fast that paperwork doesn't match reality. Report says one thing, your memory says another. I remember my boots sticking to the pavement where the other officer's cruiser had dripped coolant. I remember that distant click of the cell tower, the muffled hum of the station generator like a heartbeat beneath concrete. I locked my door and headed inside. The captain's office light was on. He glanced up at me, sharp eyes, tired lines. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, said, "All good, sir." No one asked about the man with the pipe, or the phrase he whispered, so I didn't volunteer it. I ran the basics in the report and slid my folder across. He signed off. That was it, but I couldn't let that night go. A couple of days later, I found myself back at the station around 2 a.m., alone, except for the janitor's radio static echoing in the hallway. I pulled up the CAD logs, the call history, unit response, dispositions. Clean. No mention of mental health code, no mention of weapons cleared at the scene, just assault. Suspect neutralized. I scrolled to the radio transcript. 3 lines. Officer on scene. 911, caller on site. Dispatch confirms no further units needed. Nothing on screams, nothing on the phrase. Silent words. That phrase rang in my head, like someone tapping a Morse code against my skull. I tried to piece together what he meant. Silent words. Spaces between words. Spaces between breaths. The white noise. No one talks about how people with acute psychosis experience language, but I've since learned they can hear texture in silence. A stutter, a hesitation. It's a conversation within a conversation. He'd keyed into that, my uncertainty, my fear. I pulled on latex gloves and crossed to the evidence lockers. The pipe was there, tagged, wrapped in plastic. I opened the locker and touched the shipping label. It was unremarkable. Item, iron pipe, seized weapons. But I couldn't bring myself to bag it. I stared at that curved handle, the scuffs where someone had wrapped cloth for grip. The dull metal looked alive, like it remembered the weight of his hand, how tight he squeezed. I closed the locker and found the file folder on my desk. I opened to the narrative section. Subject confronted victim. Officer Drew fired 2 rounds. Subject incapacitated. Victim sustained laceration to left ear, transported to county hospital. That was it. No mention of his delusions, no context for his haunting calm or sudden rage. I went home at dawn, body heavy. My apartment felt bullet-ridden with memories, every shadow, every floorboard creak. I lay on the couch, tried to sleep, but I heard wind chime somewhere outside, or maybe inside my head. I rolled onto my side and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the silent words to tunnel into my ears. In the days that followed, I found myself watching other officers. I'd catch rookies hesitating, bracing their voices. The ones who learned the tech, the codes, the arrest protocols, but never learned to hold their own silence. I thought about taking that pipe out of evidence and smashing it, burning it, burying it, anything to erase its memory. But evidence exists for a reason. I started spending lunch breaks in the training room, watching videos on mental health crisis interventions. I drank stale coffee as psychologists explained active listening techniques, voice modulation, how to reframe questions. But the videos felt clinical, antiseptic. None of them showed what it was like when the suspect hears more than your words, when he's reading your heartbeat. I practiced on the mannequin in the scenario bay, trained to kneel, keep my hands visible, maintain eye contact. I'd ask the mannequin, "Who are you hearing?" "What do you see?" But it never answered. By my 3rd month, I was on another night shift, responding to a crying woman behind a shuttered diner. I think I was looking for redemption, someone I could help without a swing of a pipe. The woman said her apartment was haunted, lights flickering, scratching behind the walls. I walked her through breathing exercises. I sat with her on her threadbare couch, asked her to tell me what she heard. She whispered about footsteps. I couldn't unhear that echo of footsteps on the 2nd floor from the strip mall night. Her fear coating mine. I stayed another 20 minutes, then left with a promise of counseling referral. I didn't log mental health referral in that call either. I wrote, checked residence, no signs of forced entry, no hazards. I didn't write that she cried into my uniform when I turned to leave. I didn't log that I stayed a little too long, listened a little too close. Months turned to years. Now, I teach cadets the letter of the law, policies, procedures, paperwork. But Section 4 of the operations manual doesn't cover the spaces between phrases. There's no checkbox for unofficial whisper. There's no field for silent threat. I quit the force 5 years later. I left with commendations, clean records, a smile at the retirement lunch. But I still carry that silence. I keep a small recorder in my pocket. No official use, just me talking to the dark. Some nights I play it back, voice rough and low, trying to catch the pause. Me, telling me to drop the pipe, telling me to be calm. And sometimes when I replay that night, I hear something new, just a breath, a step, a space where words used to live. I keep waking up in that same moment. Sneakers squeaking on slick asphalt, the flash of my muzzle light, the hiss of breath before the first shot. Even now, years later, my pillow is damp and twisted, and I'm strapped to a subway of memories I can't escape. I remember walking out of the training bay after that diner call. My uniform hung loose on me, and the floor tiles felt cold under my boots. I tried to shake off the static buzz of that night at the strip mall, the pipe's hollow clang, the sick thud when it hit the man's head, the smell of wet concrete and iron blood. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see him in the broken lamplight, hear that whispered demand. No silent words. I started carrying chewing gum, 2 pieces in my pocket, 1 for each side of my mouth, so I could force myself to chew and keep my jaw moving, keep my voice from catching in my throat. But chewing didn't stop the flashbacks. It just made my jaw sore, and sometimes I'd wake with the pack empty, wrappers crumpled under my pillow. Work got harder. I'd roll on to call after call, but my mind was stuck on the unfiled fragments. I arrived at fender benders and false alarms, but really I was listening for footsteps behind drywall, looking for faces turned away in too bright hallways. I taught cadets to ask open-ended questions, to de-escalate, to keep their tone low and steady. But I skipped the part about watching for silent panics, the way a suspect's eyes will flicker when they hear their own heartbeat. One night, I pulled into a gas station under a relentless drizzle. A lone pump lit. No attendant. Just a man crouched by the door, shoulders shaking. I asked, "You okay?" He looked up, eyes red, and said, "I can't stop hearing the words." My chest tightened. I recognized that panic, the echo of someone who hears things in the quiet. I pointed him to the counselor line, then posted him to mental health services. Later, I wrote in my report, "Subject distressed, referred to crisis team." No mention of the exact words he heard. The station camera taped me pacing while he dialed. I watched on the screen as the rain ran over the lens, blurring the image. I remembered the neon flicker at the strip mall, how the broken lamp cut his face in half. I thought, if I hadn't shown up, he'd still be alive. But I did show up, and he's dead, because I stood at the wrong angle, spoke in spaces he could read. I tried vodka once. I poured a shot, lifted the glass, and stared at the liquid's dim reflection. I wanted to wash out the memory, dilute the static in my mind. I sipped, then fell asleep on the couch. Woke at 3 a.m. with vomit on my shirt and the pipe's weight against my skull. No matter how hard I scrubbed, the taste of metal stayed in my mouth. So I gave up drinking. Started running dawn patrols instead, 6 miles on cracked sidewalk, earbuds pumping drill sergeant clips. But my legs remembered the shotgun blast of panic when he smiled. My lungs burned as if I'd been gasping for breath in that cold parking lot. The mile markers became a countdown to when I'd have to face my reflection. In training sessions, I'd challenge cadets. What would you do if your words were weapons? If your silence spoke louder than your pistol? They'd look confused. Every policy manual talks about tone, but no manual tells you what to do when your voice betrays you. We'd run the scenario drills. Suspect with weapon, calm voice, clear commands. But no drill accounted for a man who hears silence. I started keeping a second recorder in my nightstand, one with a manual dial, no network, connection. Before I went to sleep, I'd press record and speak my thoughts aloud. I saw him smile. I shouldn't have aimed at his back. I missed the chance to talk him down. I'd ramble for 15 minutes, then stop and play it back. Each playback felt like reliving the night all over, only slower. Sometimes I'd catch myself mid-replay, heart slammed against ribs, and I'd turn it off. The silence afterward would be heavy, like a weight in the room. I'd lie there, staring at the recorder's red light blinking in the dark, wondering if I'd ever fill the gaps in my memory, or if those gaps would always echo with the crack of his voice. They say time heals, but they never say what time heals from. My counselor says I carry survivor's guilt, but I'm not sure who survived. Every call I take now, I ask myself, where are the silent words? I scan faces for hesitation, watch lips for quivers, and try to fill the spaces with something, anything, so they don't hear what I heard. Still, I know I'll never outrun that night. The report will stay clean, typed lines that say assault, subject neutralized, no foul play. But I'll carry the unspoken truth, that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the metal you see, but the silence you leave unspoken. I still remember the weight of each breath that night, how the flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I called for backup. I filed the report, cleared the scene, but the memory kept looping in my head. I carried that vibration into every shift after, into every routine check and broken taillight, into every frightened knock on someone's door. It was a week later when I realized I couldn't separate myself from it. I was on late watch again, parked outside a 24-hour convenience store on Main. Rain pattered against the windshield. I'd barely dozed off when the silent alarm tripped. No panic in the button press, just a soft click, like a hinge opening. I switched on the overhead lights and stepped out, pistol holstered, flashlight in hand. The clerk, a young woman, stood behind the counter pale and trembling. She said nothing had been stolen, nothing taken, just that she felt watched. I ran my scanner. No alarms in the district, no distress calls. The cameras showed a man pacing outside in the downpour, hood up, head down. I stepped into the rain, boots shaking off droplets. I called, "Sir, stop." The figure froze, then looked up. His eyes were empty hollows, dull with something I couldn't name. I thought, that could be any face. I thought, thank God it's not him. But a trick of the light made me flinch. He raised a gloved hand, thumb brushing his throat. I hesitated. The pipe guy's smile came back, cold, knowing. I cleared my throat. "You all right?" I kept my tone even, tried to place him. "Do you need help?" My voice sounded brittle in the downpour. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched, tracing circles in the wet asphalt with his finger. My training kicked in. Maintain cover, keep distance, use my words. I stepped forward. "Sir, can you step inside? We can talk." He looked up then, masking dread with indifference. "You hear them too?" he whispered, so faint I almost didn't catch it. My chest tightened. "Hear who?" The clerk pressed against the doorframe, watching. The man rose, shook his head sharply. He stumbled back and yanked off his glove, revealing pale skin and a trembling wrist. "They said I'd be safe with you," he muttered. My heart pounded. "Who's they?" He pointed at the camera above the register. "Us, the watchers. They record everything." I swallowed. The camera was dead, its red light dark. I'd checked it when I came in. "That camera's off," I said. He clapped a hand over his mouth and his eyes went wide. He backed away, chest heaving. They know I see the gaps in the feed. I stood, frozen. The clerk watched from behind the glass, eyes rimmed red. I thought, God, not again. I called it in. Officer needs assistance. Suspicious individual, mental crisis. As I spoke, the man turned and sprinted toward the back exit. I chased him through aisles slick with spilled soda, my boots spraying water. He burst outside and vanished into the night, disappearing into a blur of neon and rain. Backup arrived and swept the lot. No sign of him. The clerk said she'd never seen him before. He'd vanished like smoke. I left the scene as cleared, wrote, subject not located. Never mentioned the whisper about they record everything. Never noted the way he stared at the blank camera. I just ticked the box and drove off. That night I couldn't sleep. I felt the pulse of his footsteps in my chest. I saw him crouched on the wet pavement, whispering to ghosts in the rain. I lay awake, listening for the click of cameras, the rolling hum of streetlights. I realized the world was full of silent watchers, of voices in empty spaces, of men whose minds played tricks in the dark. I tried to steal the memory from my mind. I ran my route in reverse, scrubbed my uniform till the metal snaps shone, chewed gum until my jaw ached. Nothing cleared the echo. Now, every time I'm called out to a midnight alarm or a 911 hang-up, I scan for the unseen. I check every dark corner, every flickering bulb, every dead camera. Because I know there are stories we don't file, stories that slip through the cracks, that live in the spaces between radio static and typed words. I wake up most nights to the same pulse in my head, the steady beat that isn't my own heartbeat but something else, something pacing just out of sight. I've tried to outrun it on my morning runs, tried to drown it out with the hum of the treadmill, but it always finds me when I least expect it. That week, they sent me to the community outreach program. Supposedly, a soft assignment after the convenience store call. I wore plain clothes, a polo and khakis, and sat at a folding table in the church basement. A sign read, Community Safety Workshop. I handed out pamphlets on burglary prevention and Wills Township's new mental health hotline. I smiled and shook hands, all the while listening for the silence. A woman in a headscarf approached, eyes rimmed pink. "Officer," she said, voice trembling like a leaf in wind, "I'm not safe in my own home." She described doors that locked themselves, lights that switched off on their own. I nodded, offered to walk her through a checklist. Check the locks, test the switches, call the maintenance line. She thanked me and left, clutching her pamphlet. The church hall emptied out, folding chairs stacked in corners. The fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead. I packed my files and slid them into a manila envelope. Then I stopped. The silence in that room felt wrong, too thick, like the air had weight. I closed my eyes and heard it, the faint scrape of metal against concrete. My chest tightened. I whispered to myself, "No silent words." That phrase slipped out, bitter on my tongue. It was him, the man with the pipe, his voice echoing, and it was me too, my own mind playing tricks. Suddenly, I felt exposed, as if the walls were listening. I opened my eyes and scanned the room. The podium sat empty in the front, a lone microphone dangling from a stand. The dangling cord swung slightly, though there was no breeze. I walked over and touched it. It felt warm, like a throat after a long whisper. I pulled back, heart hammering. Later, driving home, I kept one hand on the wheel, the other across my chest, fingertips brushing my badge. I parked under my street lamp, got out, and paced in the drizzle. I called dispatch and requested a mental health check on myself. They laughed it off. Automatic dispatches cost overtime. They said I was fine. That night I lay in bed listening. The recorder rested on the nightstand. I flicked it on and spoke into the darkness. I heard scraping. I felt it in my bones. I pressed stop and stared at the little red light blinking back. I wondered if it was watching me. Then I remembered something. When I holstered my weapon at the strip mall, I felt a twitch in my holster strap, like it had been pulled from the inside. I didn't write it down, I didn't tell anyone. But now I realized it wasn't my imagination. Something had brushed against me in that moment, silent, unseen. I spent the next day checking every piece of gear, flashlight, pistol, radio, all cleared. No signs of tampering. I dusted for prints on my holster. None. But when I placed my fingers on the leather, I felt the imprint of his grip, the cold dent where his hand had closed around that pipe. That night, I parked by the edge of town where the reservoir lay dark. The road wound through pine trees that stared down at me with black trunks. I sat in my cruiser and switched off the engine. I opened the door, stepped onto the shoulder, and walked until I found the old abandoned pump house. Broken windows, rusted pumps. The air smelled of mildew and decay. I raised my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating peeling paint and broken glass. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. No answer. I moved deeper inside. My boots crunched over debris. Then I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, like metal sliding across stone. I swung the flashlight to the corner. Nothing there, just darkness within darkness. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the night settle on my shoulders. I called, "If there's someone here, come forward." Silence. My breath fogged in the beam. I noticed scuff marks on the floor, parallel lines like a long object being pulled. I traced them with my light until they vanished into a dark doorway. I stepped closer. The beam flickered. I flicked the flashlight off my belt and clicked it back on. The doorway glowed. I saw the pipe, leaning upright, braced against the wall. I hadn't booked it into evidence. Back at the station, I must have left it stuffed behind other seized items. Now it sat here, waiting. I felt the edges of panic bloom in my chest. I backed away, turned, and ran for my cruiser. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. My fingers shook on the wheel. The radio static crackled, then cleared. Dispatch asked for my status. I whispered, "All good, just checking dark corners." They accepted that. I didn't go back for the pipe. I drove straight home, eyes on the road. But I know it's still out there, waiting in discarded warehouses, lurking in evidence lockers no one checks. It's waiting for someone to leave the door open, for someone to hear the scrape of metal on concrete in a silent room. I still find myself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., replaying that night at the pump house, and every night I've tried to outrun it only leads me back there. I drive past empty storefronts and shuttered warehouses, my headlights catching broken window panes and casting long, restless shadows on the pavement. I park in dark corners, just to see if the shadows move, if the pipe might be leaning against the wall when I look back. It never is, but I can still feel its weight. After that night, I requested a transfer to day patrol. They said I'd done the paperwork so well, they'd honor it. By sunrise, I was driving well-lit streets, smiling at joggers with earbuds, waving to baristas pouring lattes. I told myself it would help. I told anyone who asked that I wanted to be around normal rhythms. School drop-offs, coffee runs, mail trucks on schedule. But normal rhythms echo too. I found myself humming the pulse of the radio static, the tapping of that pipe against concrete, the echo of his demand. No silent words. 2 weeks into day shifts, I got a call at the precinct. A disturbance at Granite Avenue, possible weapons. I felt my chest tighten as I walked past the holding cells, past the DNA lockers, past the stack of old evidence bins. Every step was a countdown. I reached for a file, thinking I could escape into paperwork, but the dispatcher's voice cut through the hallway. Unit 5, respond to 221 Granite. Caller reports a man with a long metal rod smashing mailboxes. Neighbors say he's talking to no one. I stepped outside, heart hammering in daylight, an idiot for not taking leave. My partner, Officer Monroe, slowed beside me, eyes sharp. "You okay?" she asked. I shrugged. Routine call. But I could feel her glance linger on my uniform, on the way my hands trembled on the radio mic. We rolled up together. Granite Avenue was lined with single-family homes. White picket fences, flower beds fenced from the sidewalk by hedges. A few kids rode bikes, parents steered strollers, paused at the sound of our siren. We parked 10 yards from a mailbox that lay twisted on the ground. Patches of grass were stained brown. Nearby, a man stood with what looked like the same iron pipe, looping it through his fingers. He wore a gray work shirt and a baseball cap turned backwards. He stared at a row of mail slots carved into a brick pillar, as though waiting for the letters to speak. I felt the stalk of recognition coil in my spine. My voice came out taut. "Sir, we need you to step away from the mailboxes." The man lifted his head and turned slowly. His face was lined, weathered, eyes darting along the fence line. He looked like he expected someone else to be there. My partner edged up behind me, pistol at low ready. He spoke, voice low. "They told me to come back." My throat closed. I braced myself. "Who told you?" He pointed behind us, into the empty street. "The Watchers. They said you'd understand." He tapped the pipe against his palm. "You talk to me with no silent words, right?" I swallowed, heart pounding. I felt the crowd's eyes on us. Mothers gripping stroller frames, teen skateboarders frozen mid-cruise. I forced my voice steady. "Sir, I need you to put that down." I glanced at Monroe. She nodded, radio in hand. Backup would come quick in daylight. He shook his head. The pipe rose. He took a step forward, as though moving toward some unseen wall, lips moving in a whisper I couldn't hear. His eyes flicked to me, fierce, urgent. A crowd formed behind us, phones raised, faces pale. I thought, not again. Not a repeat of the strip mall, not another man under a broken lamp, another whisper no one else could know. I raised my voice. "Stop! I don't want to hurt you." My words felt hollow. He paused, breathing hard, then dropped the pipe with a clang that echoed in the quiet morning. It spun on the grass and came to rest, pointed at me, like an accusatory finger. Silence. Perfect, crushing silence. I stood there, watching him, waiting for the next move. My partner holstered her weapon and stepped forward. "Sir, you're safe now. Let's talk." She offered her hand. He looked at her like she was foreign, then at me, confusion softening his face. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but no sound came. We cuffed him gently. People whispered. No one helped him up. No one cheered or clapped. We read him his rights. He stared at the brick pillar, at the empty mail slots. His face slackened as though he'd run out of breath. He looked real then, broken, fragile, full of silent screams. Later, in booking, I wrote, "Subject arrested for vandalism." I didn't log the whispered line. I didn't describe the way he studied my face, searching for something in the spaces I left unspoken. I filed my report, watched it route through channels, each department stamping it closed. The mailboxes got replaced. The man got a mental health hold. I never saw him again. But I carry it with me, every shift, a potential for another echo. I train officers to watch for the signs. Furtive glances, slowed speech, the way someone's eyes flick past your ear to an empty corner. I tell them to offer calm words, clear commands, but I can't teach them how to fill the spaces between words. No manual covers that. Sometimes, after I clock out, I drive Granite Avenue again, under street lamps now fixed above each mailbox. I park and step out, lean on the cruiser, and stare at those homely brick pillars. I imagine him, standing there, pipe in hand, waiting for someone to whisper back through the hush. I open my mouth, but I don't speak. I stop my breath in my throat. I wait for the unseen response. Then I drive off, leaving the quiet behind. I left another scene cleared, another report completed. But the gaps in my reports grow with every unwritten whisper, every memory I bury in the dark. And I know that one day someone will find the spaces between the lines, and they'll read what I refuse to write down. I remember pulling that call at 2:30. The dispatch tone cut through the cruiser's old speakers, quiet, clipped. "Welfare check," they said. "Apartment 4B, no answer." I jotted it down, glanced at the address lit by one lone street lamp. Rain had passed hours ago, but the asphalt still gleamed. I felt the weight of the night settle in my chest before I even stepped out. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and bleach. The walls were off-white, each flicker of the overhead light casting shadows that slid along the baseboards. I knocked once, soft, deliberate, then twice. No answer. I called out, voice low. "Apartment 4B, this is Officer Barnes. Everything okay?" Silence answered. I keyed my mic. "Dispatch, entry permitted?" The click of confirmation came through before I had to wait. They didn't ask questions. I swiped my flashlight across the closed door. The knob was warm, as if someone had just cradled it in their palm. I pressed my shoulder, eased it open. The room felt colder inside. No furniture, bare walls, peeling paint, no signs of life, except the television, screen black, perched on a dusty stand. A half-empty glass on the windowsill caught my beam and sent a prism of streetlight slanting across the floor. I scanned for the expected clutter. Overturned chair, broken glass, signs of struggle. Nothing. Only an empty cardboard box in the corner. I approached, heart pounding softly. The box was sealed with clear tape. I peeled it back. Black plastic sheeting. Then another box. Same. I frowned. No shipping labels, no markings. I shone the light under a table. A single shoe, scuffed. Ladies' size 6. No match for anyone I'd met on the force. I called dispatch again. Unit reports empty apartment. 2 boxes sealed, 1 shoe inside, no ID. The line crackled. Copy, standing by. I scanned the kitchenette. Sink dry, oven cold. No dishes in the drainer. But the knob on the fridge was warm. I opened it. Empty. Warm air rushed out. I closed it slowly, the cold night wrapping around me like an old coat. I felt uneasy. No forced entry, no neighbors complaining, no paperwork on file. Yet here I was, alone in a hollow shell of an apartment. I backed toward the door, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the dim. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle from the far corner. My light swung, caught a figure crouched behind the boxes, thin, draped in dark fabric. I jerked back. "Police," I said, voice steady. The figure didn't move. I edged forward. "Hey, come out." The figure stood. A woman, young, pale, she held one of the boxes. Her eyes were sunken, lips cracked. She didn't speak. I stepped forward, hand on my taser, voice calm. "It's okay, we just need to talk." She nodded once, dropped the box. I holstered and reached for my cuffs. She let me slip them on without protest. I guided her to the door. I radioed for backup. 2 units. Then I saw her footprints in the thin layer of dust on the floor. They led from the hallway to the back wall. Too many trips. Too precise. She shuffled forward, head bowed. I urged her into the hallway, rain-slick tile under my boots. The other officers arrived, lights strobing through the grim corridor. I handed her over, explained the situation. Back in the cruiser, I told dispatch the apartment was clear now. No one ill, no immediate danger. Case closed. But I couldn't shake the image of her standing silent among the boxes, the single shoe, the empty fridge that still felt warm. I never wrote it down. I filed a simple report. Welfare check, apartment secure, subject taken in for evaluation. I left out the boxes, the shoe, her hollow eyes. On my next shift, I checked the file. No mention of sealed boxes or that shoe. No record of a person found. Just a routine welfare check. I closed it and moved on. But every time I see an empty hallway or a peeling door, I think of 4B. I think of what I didn't write. And I remember how easily you can erase the wrong details and still call it a complete file. I'm on the night shift, third week into the rotation. It's past midnight when the call drops. A routine traffic stop opportunity, dispatch says. Suspicious vehicle, they warn. I take the cruiser off auto park and ease onto the rain-slicked street, lights low. The city sleeps behind boarded storefronts and shuttered cafes. Street lamps cut cones of pale yellow over empty sidewalks. The air smells of damp asphalt and distant exhaust. I see it ahead. A white cargo van, unmarked, drifting just above the speed limit. No company logos, no license tags I recognize. Behind the wheel, a lone figure. I flip on the lights, steady blue and red, pulsing in the dark. The van glides to a halt under a street lamp, its engine humming. I kill my lights, park 15 feet behind, and step out. My boots click on wet pavement. Flashlight in left hand, service pistol holstered low on my right hip. I tap the roof of the cruiser and call dispatch. Unit 6-1 on the stop. White van. Operator appears alone. I'll be right there. Rain has stopped, but droplets cling to my jacket. I pull the collar up, approach the driver's side. I knock on the window, firm, no movement. I tap again, then voice low. Driver, this is Officer Mitchell, City PD. Please open your window halfway and place your hands on the wheel. My tone is calm, professional. I wait. The window rolls down all the way, swift. It's too much. Arm extended, the driver's face emerges. Young woman, wide eyes, dark brows drawn tight. Heart skips. My radio crackles. Talk to me, I murmur back. Nothing yet. She's fumbling at her side. I ask for license and registration. She pulls a sleek wallet from her coat pocket, hands shaking. I see her fingertips tremble when she hands over the plastic card. No cracks, no scuffs. Name reads -- period. She doesn't say much, just, Officer, I don't speak French. Her accent flickers over English vowels. Strange detail, I think, not the norm for locals. I glance at the plates, valid, expiration 2 months out. Van's model matches registration. No stolen flags. I call dispatch. All clear on plates, subjects valid. Then I hear it. A hollow echo from the van's rear. A faint rattle, like something metal shifting. I shine my flashlight at the sliding door. Closed, locked. I ask, anything in the back? She shrugs. Just some boxes, moving belongings. I pause. It's routine enough. People move late at night all the time, but something on her jacket catches my eye. A smudge of dirt that looks more like dried blood than soil. I glance back at the boxes through the tinted rear window. No logos, nothing identifiable. I clear my throat. Mind if I have a look? She blinks, shakes her head and steps out. Her boot treads leave wet prints on the pavement. I holster my flashlight and guide her around to the rear. She stands aside, shoulders tight. I tug the latch. The door swings open with a hiss. Inside are cardboard boxes, stacked neat. No labels, no personal effects spilling out. I shine my beam, a single black plastic stretcher bracket, no mattress. A coil of rope. A cardboard carton marked only with shipping tape. I swallow. This isn't a routine traffic violation. I step back, radio for backup. Unit 6-1 needs assistance, possible contraband or worse in van. The reply comes quick. Copy. ETA 2 minutes. I turn to her. Ma'am, step out of the van. She obeys, eyes cast down. I holster too quick, left hand on my cuffs. I slip them around her wrists, snug but not crushing. She winces, nods. I guide her to the cruiser's passenger door. Her coat drips rainwater onto the runner. I ask, why the late move? Why the unmarked van? She doesn't answer, breaths shallow. I bag the box materials for evidence. Dusty cardboard, loose tape. No fingerprints, no identifying marks. I radio the details. One female suspect, mid-20s, cuffed. Van contains unspecified packages, possible kidnapping materials. They feed it to dispatch, confirm location. The night stretches. I wait. I can't shake the twitch in her jaw or how she stared at nothing as if expecting someone behind me. I keep the flashlight on. Rain starts again, slow at first, then steady, drums on the van's roof. I think of the empty hotel room she mentioned once, where she worked night shift in France. I recall how she said she borrowed that van because her car was in the shop, a replacement from some shady rental place. No one asked questions, and here she is on my side of the world, speaking broken English, carrying shifting boxes and old rope. My ride-along partner shows up, Unit 6-3, lights off. He takes my spot. I step back, hands out of cuffs. I voice-to-voice him the scene. He kneels by the van, inspects the corner box. We find nothing overtly illegal, no drugs, no weapons. But the rope and bracket tell a story we can't file neatly. So we bag it anyway. Forensics will sift. She sits silent in the cruiser, head leaning against the glass, eyes closed. I watch her breathe. Once the inventory is logged, they decide to arrest her for investigation. I cuff her again, official this time, and load her in. The van gets towed. I stand in the rain, wrists numb, jacket soaked. I radio final, unit cleaning up. Van and subject in custody, and call. Dispatch says copy. The sirens of the patrol car cut through the night as they drive off. I stand alone, flashlight beam oscillating over wet asphalt. No sign of forced entry, no witnesses, no written statements. Tomorrow, the report will read, suspicious vehicle, female subject, moved for investigation. No mention of the empty makeshift stretcher, the rope, her silence. No note that she nearly didn't roll down the window when asked halfway. No record of the moment I doubted whether I'd saved her or condemned her. I wipe my face. The rain soaks through my shirt. I slip back to the cruiser. I sit, radio off, engine idling. I reach for my notebook, thumb over the page. I never write this down, not the details that matter. Because if I did, I'd have to ask myself what I saw in those shadows. And that's not a file anyone wants. I sat in the cruiser for a long minute, hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee from the station. The rain had stopped, but droplets clung to the windshield like teardrops. I stared at the tow truck headlights fading down the street, van and subject long gone. My partner was back at booking, filling out forms. I was supposed to log mileage and clear for patrol, but I lingered. I could still feel her presence in that van. The way she kept her eyes on the dash, unmoving. The rope coiled in the back that never quite rattled the way it should when the door swung open. The stretcher bracket with its sharp edges. Everything so neat, so deliberate. I I reached for my notebook. Section: Suspicious vehicle, white van, female operator. I tightened my fist. I didn't write the tote of boxes or the way her boots left wet prints. I didn't write how she flinched when I asked her to step out, or how she never raised her head again until they cuffed her. I didn't log her muted sobbing the instant the door shut behind her on the way to the squad car, because if I did, I would have to explain why I hesitated to search further, why I stepped back when I heard the soft thump in the shadows, why I let her slip hands first through cold metal cuffs rather than rip them off and ask questions, why I believed her cover story, that she was only moving belongings, a cover story she never offered until I asked directly. I thought about the empty stretcher bracket. There was room in that van for something more than belongings, room for a body, room for something or someone unseen, oblong space against the far wall. I traced that shape in my mind, running a finger around the edge of that bracket until it felt like an imprint against my skull. I stood, unlocked the cruiser door, and stepped into the damp night. The street was empty now, just me and the dull glow of the street lamp overhead. I walked to the curb, looked down the block. No sign of the van, no sign of the girl. One lone shoe print still lingered on the wet pavement, pointed toward the open road. I crouched, ran my gloved finger along that print. Too small for a man, not quite matching the passenger shoe left in the box at 4B. Too dainty for my boots, but sturdy, like she expected to walk a long way. I pressed my thumb to it, felt the cool imprint. Thought of a woman alone in the dark, late shift, far from home, forced to borrow a van that shouldn't exist, with equipment she wouldn't dare load. I pressed my palm to the rough asphalt. The print faded under my glove. I stood slowly, dust motes dancing in the yellow light. I breathed, felt my chest tighten. Every fiber of me said this was more than a suspicious vehicle, but my report was already filed. The van was impounded. She was booked for investigation, and then what? I didn't know. I walked back to the cruiser, slid in behind the wheel, keys in the ignition. I watched my breath mist on the glass. Tried to decide if I could spoil that report, if I could add possible victim inside van. But I already knew they wouldn't back me up. There wasn't enough. No blood, no body, no direct evidence, just a hunch, that sick feeling. I started the engine, lights flickering on. Back to patrol, back to checking on the next drifter in a cold alley, the next noise complaint from a boarded storefront, the next empty house with doors unlocked. Because that was my job, to call them incidents, to move on. But I couldn't move on, not really. Even now, days later, that bracket's outline presses against the inside of my skull. I dream in a steady pulse, the van door sliding open on its own, the rope dangling, the boxes toppling in slow motion, and then her eyes, wide, hollow, looking at me from the darkness, saying nothing. I won't file an addendum, I won't log the missing details, I'll tell myself I did my job. I'll say I followed procedure. But I know I lied by omission. I chose the easier story, the one that let me close the file and move on with my shift. I flick the overhead light off and pull out onto the wet road. The cruiser's lights carve bright rectangles against the black. I pass under street lamps I've seen 100 times, but they look new tonight, like searchlights. And I wonder, if I had pressed the flashlight into every corner of that van, if I'd dug into the boxes, torn off the tape, followed that print, what truths I might have uncovered. I might have saved someone, or I might have damned them. But those possibilities died in the dark when I drove off. I erased them. And now, every time I hear a van's engine idling in the night, I think of her, I think of what I missed and why I missed it. I pull onto the highway, headlights cutting through the mist. The city's glow fades behind me, and the engine hum becomes the only companion. My mind churns through the night's fragments, the white van, the neat boxes, the stretcher bracket's cold metal, her silent silhouette. Each moment loops like a broken tape, winding tighter in my chest. Miles pass. My reflection stares back from the side window. A gaunt face under a brimmed cap, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. I reach up and rub my temple, feeling a dull ache that no coffee can soothe. The radio crackles with routine chatter, no mention of van or suspect. It's like I imagined the whole thing. I turn off at the next exit. The road curls into a cluster of low buildings. Service stations, shuttered diners, empty lots. I park under a lone lamp, its yellow glow flickering. I kill the engine and sit, letting the cruiser breathe. The damp smell of vinyl seats and old cigarette smoke fills the cab. I stare at the dashboard clock, 4:30 in the morning. The hours until shift end stretch out like an ocean. I unzip my jacket and tug at my collar. My uniform's stiff fabric scratches at my neck. I dig in my coat pocket, pull out the arrest report I wrote earlier. Suspicious vehicle. Subject detained for investigation. Van impounded. That's it. Nothing about empty boxes or that single shoe print at 4B. Nothing about the hollow echo from the back or the way the rope lay coiled, waiting. Nothing about her eyes. The way they glinted with fear and something else I can't name. I grip the paper until it crumples. Ink smudges under my fingertips. I shake my head. Filing an addendum would take 10 minutes, maybe less, but it would open a door. A door I'm not sure I want to walk through. It would force me to face what I suspected and what I let slip away. It would demand I admit that I believed her story without proof, that I trusted the veneer of order over my gut screaming warning. I lean back, close my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I see her standing, framed in the half-open door of that van. I see the stretcher bracket with its empty cradle, like the skeleton of a promise left unfulfilled. I see her mouth opening, silent scream swallowed by the driver's seat. I see my hand on the latch, frozen. Somewhere in my training they drilled in me to trust evidence, ignore emotion. But emotion is where truth sometimes hides. In the trembling of her hands. In the stale scent of fear that lingered long after she was gone. In the single shoe print pressed into wet concrete, pointing away like a question mark. I crack open the window. The night air rushes in, cold and wet. I breathe deeply, tasting metal and damp earth. I think of the next call. Noise complaints at an abandoned factory. Rattling chains. Maybe squatters. Ghost stories. I wonder which details I'll omit this time. Which shadows I'll let slip unchallenged. I stand, straighten my cap, and close the report with a definitive snap. I tuck it into the filing drawer in my mind and lock it. I step out into the lamp's glare. The mist swirls around my boots as I walk away. Uniform soaked already. I don't look back at the cruiser. I don't want to see my own reflection again. When I reach the patrol desk to log back on, the sun will be a pale promise on the horizon. My partner will joke about donuts, or the weird old woman at the 24-hour shop. I'll force a smile. I'll appease dispatch with the standard copy. Then I'll head out again, ready to collect new incidences, new stories to file, new details to curate, new ghosts to ignore. But tonight, I carry one ghost that won't stay locked in a file. It rides shotgun in the passenger seat of my thoughts. It whispers every time a white van drifts past or a door creaks open in the dark. It reminds me that some calls aren't routine. that some shadows hide truths we choose not to find. I light a cigarette, inhale slow. Smoke curls around me before drifting upward. The ember glows bright in the gloom, then fades. My hand trembles slightly as I crush it underfoot. I head back to the cruiser, slip into the driver's seat and buckle the belt. The engine starts, the world blurs, and I roll forward into the next stretch of highway, alone with the unfiled moments that haunt me most. Because the hardest confessions aren't written in reports. They live in the silence we cultivate when we erase what terrifies us most. I drive on until the asphalt ends and the dirt road begins, cracked ribbons of earth leading past abandoned motels and shuttered gas pumps, their neon signs long since drowned by dust and time. My headlights carve twin slivers of light ahead, illuminating the rough surface and the ragged edge of brush that crowds the shoulders. The engine's rumble thrums through the frame, a low heartbeat that keeps me tethered to the moment, though my mind is miles behind, back in the van's cavernous interior. I can still taste the coppery tang of fear that hovered in the cab air when I cracked the rear door and saw nothing but stacked boxes and that empty stretcher bracket. I breathe shallowly, the leather steering wheel cool under my fingers as I navigate a deep rut in the road, reminding myself how easy it is to let the van disappear from my sight and from my report. I replay the night in fragments, like scratchy film reels looping in my skull, her face illuminated by the flashlight beam, pale and drawn, the coil of rope lying across a box lid, her boot stepping back when I asked her to exit, the way she flinched at the click of the handcuffs. I remember how the radio crackled as backup sped in, its static a promise of help that never truly arrived for her. I never logged her tears, or the single shoe print I found pressed into the soaked pavement, pointing away like an accusation. I never wrote down the hollow echo of those boxes rattling as the wind picked up outside. Never asked why they rattled when there was no mattress to shift inside. And I never noted the way my own pulse hammered in my ears as I closed the door and watched her slip into the cruiser, the red and blue lights reflecting off her tear-streaked face. I pull the cruiser into a clearing where the brush parts enough to see the sky, an expanse of stars so bright it almost feels like daylight. I kill the engine and step out, boots crunching on gravel. The cold air stings my lungs, bracing me, and I lean forward, hands on my knees, head bowed. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight, the authority I wielded, the questions I asked, the ones I didn't. The power I had to detain her, to dig deeper, to refuse her story until she cracked. And the power I chose instead to turn away, to treat it all as a simple transport case, a routine file closed without fuss. I stare at the sky, tracing constellations I learned as a kid on my grandfather's farm, back before uniforms and reports and suspicions defined every dark-shrouded moment. He taught me that every detail matters. Every bird call at dawn, every shift in the wind. He said the world would whisper to anyone who'd listen. But I was in a rush then, too. I hurried through college, through training, through the motions, convinced that procedure outranked intuition. Now I know I was wrong. The temperature drops, and my breath fogs in front of me. I feel the tremor in my hands and realize I've been gripping my flashlight so tight the knuckles have turned white. I slide it into my belt holster and rub my thumbs over the cold metal. In the beam of my pocket torch, I spot a scrap of paper snagged in the brush. An old pay stub, half dissolved by rain. I pick it up, fold it into my pocket. It's the only evidence of a life lived outside these files. Proof that people exist in these moments between calls. People who borrow vans and speak broken French and carry their belongings in plain cardboard boxes, but who might also carry secrets I never asked them to reveal. I climb back into the cruiser, sit in the driver's seat, and close my eyes. The dashboard clock reads 5:47. Too early for dawn, too late for rest. I reach for my notebook. I place the paper scrap on the passenger seat next to a pack of evidence bags and an empty coffee cup. My pen hovers over the blank line where the addendum could go. For a second, I believe I'll write it. I'll pour out every uneasy detail, every question I failed to ask, every fear I stifled with official language. I'll own my mistakes. I'll admit the darkness I let slip past, trusting in a neat report rather than my own instincts. But the needle on the speedometer still flickers at 0. The cruiser idles in silence, and I feel the hollow draw of routine pulling me back. My hand lowers. The notebook stays closed. The scrap of paper remains crumpled beside me. I tuck them both under my arm, leave the door open, and step out again. The horizon flushes pale blue as the first light creeps over the distant hills. The motels on either side of the road seem to sigh in the coming day, shutters rattling softly. Somewhere, a bird cries, a single clear note that hangs in the crisp air. I walk back to the cruiser, slide into the seat, and close the door with a soft click. I buckle the belt, the sound echoing louder than any siren. I start the engine, headlights flick on, and I pull back onto the dirt road. Each mile marker whispers a promise of the next call. A noise complaint at the vacant church, a trespasser in the old cotton mill, a hang-up call from a house slated for demolition. I know I'll respond like I always do, lights low, questions brief, report written neat. I'll file each as routine, erase the unsettling details, and move on to the next. But I won't forget, not really, because the quietest confessions are the ones we bury deepest, and I carry this one with me every time I drive by a white van, every time I close a door and leave a shadow behind. I'll tell myself I did my job, that procedure saved me, that I couldn't prove more. But I know the truth I never filed will ride with me whenever the night falls. Even now, when the sunrise bleeds across the sky, I feel her stance in my mirror, silhouette etched against morning light. And I know some stories refuse to be erased, no matter how neatly you close the folder or press file. Because mistakes born in silence echo forever.